This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
It is 3 minutes after 10 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where the shackles are off, the straitjacket has been removed, and we are allowed to wade enthusiastically into post-match analysis or electoral coverage. We are prevented, if you're wondering what on earth I'm gibbering on about, by broadcasting regulations from talking about it while the election is actually underway. And I mean, good night for reform, which raises all sorts of questions, not least, actually, how on earth does Farage manage to continue to successfully disassociate himself from all the things that he's personally responsible for? Good night for Team Putin, I suppose you could say. But the man who put Boris Johnson in Downing Street, effectively, who brought you Brexit and who described Liz Truss's budget as the finest thing since sliced bread, continues to just sort of, it all washes off him, doesn't he? It's very, very strange. We may get onto that. But I think we begin with the governing party. We begin with Labour, who have had a bit of a mare, or not a mare, actually, in at least one of the places where they stood. But they've hung on to all of their mares, which I think may come as something of a surprise. I'm surprised to hear people talking about Labour heartlands. I think post-2019, that became a rather hollow phrase, the so-called red wall that fell to Boris Johnson in 2019 because people still hadn't seen the Brexit rabbit in all its glory. It's just suggested to me that sort of presumption, that lazy presumption that places like Doncaster would always be Labour, I thought that began to fall apart then. But here's the thing. And this is a conversation that I have a little bit cautiously. There's two things you need to remember. This is a vote by a quarter of the population of England, give or take. So nothing in Scotland, nothing. I don't think anything in Wales was there. That's on the horizon, or Northern Ireland, and only a quarter of voters in England. So on the one hand, I don't want anybody to feel alienated by a conversation about something that didn't involve them. But I didn't have a vote, and I'm fascinated by what's happened. So I think we can talk about it. I think we should talk about it. And we're also still 4 years maximum out from a general election, so as with opinion polls. In fact, one of Keir Starmer's first acts as Labour leader was to lose an unlosable by-election, wasn't it? And everybody started making noises about his leadership possibly coming to a premature end, which makes me a little bit wary of doing the same thing now. But I can't help noting the regularity and frequency with which people tell me Keir Starmer is the problem. I can't help noting it. And do you know what really brought it home this morning? Was a lot of people were talking earlier in the week, including this sort of a bloke I've never heard of before. I think his name is Glassman, who has been saying very negative things about the Labour Party and used to have a job in it or something. So of course right-wing media treat him like the second coming, such is the desperation to find Labour people to slag off Labour. But I just thought to myself, when everybody was talking earlier in the week about the fact that Starmer hadn't visited Runcorn and that this proved that they thought they'd already lost, and you know sometimes my thoughts go off in the opposite direction to everybody else and I'm wrong, but I did find myself thinking really the opposite of what everybody else was thinking, and I found myself wondering whether they thought that Starmer turning up in Runcorn might actually lose them votes. This is one bloke on the radio thinking out loud, all right? I don't have relationships or contacts with people in Downing Street, whoever's in Downing Street, whether it's a Labour government or a Conservative government. I don't do that kind of journalism. If I was ever going to, it's probably too late. I'm not saying it's bad or worse than what I do, but I don't like to socialise. I don't like to network. I don't like to do anything with politics. It's bad enough interviewing them on full disclosure because I end up liking them. And if you like them, it's quite hard to give them a kicking when they deserve a kicking a few months or years down the line. And that's kind of the territory that we are edging towards today, because I cannot ignore the people who insist that Starmer is the problem. And I cannot shake the thought that the decision not to go to Runcorn, and everyone's talking this morning about how they only lost by 6 votes, and maybe if the Prime Minister had turned up, they'd have got the votes that they needed to get over the line. Nobody, as far as I'm aware, has suggested that if he had turned up, they'd have lost by more than 6 votes. I don't know. We will never know. It's a counterfactual, but it's an interesting one, isn't it? So I have had people from the left, obviously, and continuity Corbyn. I think we need to separate those two categories. Plenty of people who are more left-wing than me who understand the necessity of getting into power before you can do anything with it, and then continuity Corbyn who revel in being perpetually aggrieved losers. They're two separate constituencies, but they've had a problem with Starmer for quite a long time. The first category, policy-based, rather than sort of cultish revulsion, policy-based. And the word coming from Runcorn was that the winter fuel allowance and the what's the other one? What's the other big one? The winter fuel allowance and was it the disability payments? The two big things that kept coming up on the doorstep were the idea of people being personally affronted by the perceived assaults on some of the more vulnerable members of our society. And that has Keir Starmer's fingerprints all over it. So possibly we'll regret this in 6 months' time. Possibly we'll feel a little bit silly for kicking this off the back of one by-election and one round of council votes. But Is Keir Starmer becoming the problem? And you need to give me something sensible if you're going to answer yes to that question. Is the association that pops up in your head, the image that the words Keir Starmer brings up in your head, becoming a problem? It may be that whoever was leading the Labour Party at the moment would have suffered a similar result, but I can no longer ignore the I can no longer ignore the idea or the number, the clamour, the volume of people identifying him personally as the problem. So, policy or personal? 034, or a little bit of both. 03456060973. Because listen, you can talk until you're blue in the face about bad communication or Morgan McSweeney being the problem. He's the fella in Downing Street who apparently pulls all of the strings. An awful lot of people of my political outlook think that this chasing of the right-wing vote is pretty ugly. Whether or not it's pragmatic, time will tell. You know, some of these arguments have been lost, even though the people have won the arguments are wrong. It's like the legacy of Brexit. People think that persecuting immigrants will make their life better. It won't, of course, but so many people think it that the Labour Party sometimes seem to think that there's no point having the argument anymore. There's no point standing up for what is right and decent, and that is pragmatism. That is the absence of ideology that can be either a strength or a weakness. But I think if you are Prime Minister or if you are a party leader, then there is a question ultimately or eventually about whether you are doing good or harm in the role. I mean, you could ask the same question about Farage. The number of people that are violently opposed to him is one of the highest in political history. I think it's about half of the population who are repulsed by him. Whether or not that keeps a lid on their electoral ambitions, only time will tell. But I think we'll start today with the Prime Minister. And I'm going to invoke St. Carol of Vorderman at this point, if I may. And I'm going to tell you something I haven't told you before, which is when I interviewed Carol for Full Disclosure on stage in Leicester Square back in, I think, January. And Carol, if you don't know, is an incredible evangelist when it comes to tactical voting. She has worked very hard to give people the information that they need to vote in pursuit of a result, rather than wasting a vote on a candidate or a party that you like but has no chance of winning in the election you're voting in. Carol is very passionate about tactical voting. And she said something to me on stage that and this does not happen to me very often, I was so surprised by it that I didn't go there. I was so unprepared for what she said to me that I didn't follow up the line of questioning. It was really near the end of the interview, if memory serves. You can have a listen, get it down from Global Player and double check for me. But I think it was pretty near the end of the interview. Or I had a couple of other things that I needed to get to before curtains. But I didn't really explore it. She said something to me that took me so by surprise that I didn't really drill down into what she was saying and why she was saying it. And what she said to me was, and if this does turn out to be a case of premature speculation, then I'll blame it all on Carol Vorderman. But what she said to me was that she didn't think Keir Starmer would lead Labour into the next election. And she said it in January. And at the time, I'm sure she won't mind me telling you, I thought that was a little bit bonkers. And I may think it's bonkers again 6 months from now. And I remind you that one of Keir Starmer's first tests as the leader of the opposition was to lose a by-election that should not have been losable. And speculation began then about his leadership. He went on to secure one of the most epochal Labour victories in the history of general elections. So we may end up looking stupid, in which case I shall blame it all on Carol Vorderman. But I don't think it's a stupid question today. And the inbox, the number of people that are leaning into this idea, not just continuity Corbyn or the I don't even like the phrase hard left, but the people who really expected this government to do a little bit more for people perceived as needing help. There's been a very conscious decision, hasn't there, to disassociate or to try to get away from the idea of being the party for the unemployed, or being the party for the poorly, or being the party for the recently arrived. They're very keen to shake off that mantle, and for many people, they've tried too hard to shake it off. They've thrown out various babies with this particular bathwater. But the question remains: the figurehead, the question of the figurehead. So I don't want to conclude already, because I like the man. I like what I know of him. I don't like everything he's done, far from it. But he is very different. Again, he's been on stage in Leicester Square for a full disclosure recording before he became Prime Minister. And there were sides to him there that I've never, ever seen, either in other interviews or in PMQs or in his political performances. This is not an attack. This is a question. Is it possible this early in the Premiership that Keir Starmer's brand is fatally damaged? And if you think that this is complete nonsense, then ring me and tell me why. It's a perfectly reasonable question to ask after losing a by-election in what was previously one of the safest Labour seats in the land. 0345 60 973 is the number that you need. Is it policy? Is it personality? And if it's both, how do you break the ratio down? And you get sent straight to the back of the queue if you reach for the infernal ratio of 52-48. It's 10:17. The phone lines are open.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10:18 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I wish it was a good morning, James, writes Lorraine. But having got the Ming vase over the line, he doesn't seem to know how to put the flowers in it. He doesn't even know where the flower shop is. Listen, as the king of analogies, I probably shouldn't criticise others, so I won't. I think it might be as simple as that, and I agree with Carol Vorderman. And yet, of course, the long-term plan and the list of things that have been done is quite long. The problem is, if it's not landing with people, you're not going to win votes. So it's the eternal disconnect, isn't it? A politician who's absolutely blooming awful can win votes with their awfulness, and a politician who's quietly doing quite a good job will not win votes because everything is quiet. But I don't know if that's a bit generous. Let's find out. Steve's in Liverpool. Steve, what would you like to say?
Morning, James. Yeah, I'm 71. I was a member of the Labour Party since I was 18. I left about 3 months ago.
Did you?
I did, yeah. I left, yeah, okay. Because of Keir Starmer. I come from a socialist city. I live in a constituency where you've got a Labour MP, Ian Byrne, and with a matter of months that Keir Starmer was Prime Minister, he suspended him. He's an independent now. A socialist Labour.
What was he suspended for?
a number of things.
What was the main thing?
He came out against the cuts to... he was openly, basically hostile to the cuts to winter fuel payments and the PIP payments. And so Keir Starmer, he actually threw him out the party.
Okay.
And people in Liverpool have waited so long for a Labour government to come along. It has come along now, and it's no different from the Tory government. You tell me what's different between the Labour Party now and the Conservatives under Boris Johnson.
And that is, for you, curtains. That's sayonara. That's goodbye.
I'll name my colours to the mast.
Listen, he's back. He got the whip restored in February.
Reluctantly, apparently.
Well, you can't have it both ways. If I hadn't double checked that, because it was niggling a bit. Everybody else listening would have gone away with the idea that he was still suspended. But
why did he suspend him in the first place?
I think your analysis of that was correct. But the point is, he's had the whip restored. So Starmer in the early days was just cracking the whip, wasn't he? He was just making sure that there wasn't a kind of Corbyn-esque constant state of turmoil in the parliamentary party. But I'm not arguing with you. I just wanted to clarify that point.
Okay, he was cracking the whip at socialists, basically, wasn't he?
He never claimed to be a socialist, and you and I might not like it. I don't describe myself as a socialist, but I completely respect you for doing so. He never claimed to be that, and the country. I mean, if he had done, it's unlikely he would have won the election. So what do you want? Where do you go instead then?
Where I want, I'll never get. I want Jeremy Corbyn back, but that's not going to happen.
No, it's not. Well, so you'd rather be in opposition forever, but ideologically pure. Your version of ideological purity.
I'd sooner be in opposition if it meant people pointing the finger at my party because of things that they've done. I mean, to say, we're going to, in a couple of weeks' time, we're going to be celebrating VE Day, 80 years that we beat the Nazis.
It's on Thursday. We'll start celebrating on Monday, I think.
Yeah, and in 4 years' time, we could have a Prime Minister that stood supporting the granddaughter of Adolf Hitler.
Wasn't you put me into... You're making me a fact checker, Steve. It's not the granddaughter of Adolf Hitler. She was the granddaughter of one of his key allies, and they've just been appointed as an extremist group by the German intelligence services. So you speak of the ADF, the German party, but I mean, this is the point, isn't it? And there comes a point where I think you're wrong about there being no difference between them and the Tories. Most obviously on the workers' rights bill, energy, housing, there's all sorts of things that they've done differently. But the fact that you don't know that is a failure of government, and it's a failure of communication. The fact that you'd rather be in perpetual opposition is perhaps a failure of vision, and the fact that you're going to abandon the Labour Party makes it more likely that your man Farage benefits electorally, but you can live with that apparently.
I'm 71, unless I could drop dead tomorrow, or I could live another 10 years. We all could. Yeah,
but that's what's interesting about what you're saying, is that your disillusionment with Starmer is so high, or your devotion to Jeremy Corbyn so complete, that you would actually increase the likelihood of Farage advancing, Farage becoming, as you suggest, becoming Prime Minister. Would you, I don't know. There it is. Brent's in Frodsham, which I think is possibly in the relevant constituency. What would you like to say, Brent?
Oh, good morning, James.
Hello,
just say I'm a big fan of your show and I like your work.
You're very kind.
Not a problem. I think Keir has got a bit of an image problem. But I'd say the far left say he's a Tory, the far right say he's a lefty loony. So to me, it kind of puts him somewhere in the middle.
Yes.
But I kind of think he's a bit vanilla. But at the same time, compared to what we've had previous to him, is the most statesman-like of people. So,
I mean, that's why I'm a little bit embarrassed to be having this conversation so soon, because I've spent an awful lot of time yearning for dullness after all the excitement of the last few years. I just thought we need some dullness now. And the exciting politicians, for want of a better word, have turned out to be a curious mixture of charlatans and incompetence. But
absolutely, yeah,
we've got dull, and we're not over the moon with it, are we, Brent?
No, and I think, it's come into a situation now. A lot of people will disagree that there's been this black hole and everything, but he's had to make some tough decisions, and quite right, he's got straight on with it. Get that done in the first year, away from a general election. And we've had the unfortunate circumstance where our MP Mike did something very stupid, and it's caused a by-election.
Yes,
at the peak of Labour's disapproval at the moment.
And we've been here before. We've seen this film before. You wouldn't expect necessarily. Well, you certainly wouldn't expect an incumbent to perform well in this position in this point in the electoral cycle, but I think we might have expected them to perform better. Were you surprised by how close it was?
No, I mean we're all kind of being told how close it was. I was actually a little bit surprised that Labour managed to claw a little bit back, because we were.
That's what I meant, actually. That's what I meant by it. I thought it was all done and dusted. I thought that it was all over, bar the singing. But 6 votes. There's 10 people living within a square mile of where you're sitting now. There's 10 people thinking, "Oh, whoops, I should have voted."
Well, if you look at social media, all the people doing the shouting were the Reform voters, and the kind of middle lane voters don't say too much. They tend to stay fairly quiet, so it gets a little bit distorted. That's a great point. I was hoping that the traditional voters would see all this surge for reform support and think, do you know what, I need to get down there and do something about that. Because me myself, I was a lifelong Conservative voter, up until Brexit. And because of all the lies of Brexit, I couldn't vote for Conservatives. So I swapped to Labour, because Elsie's actually previously been Conservative, and I voted for the Conservative MP twice before when he was our MP. And I switched to Mike then. And
Fair enough.
voted Labour ever since, but I have probably got a bit more centralist, so I still put myself slightly right of centre, and I'm voting Labour. I mean, what does that kind of say to you?
Well, it's a fascinating juxtaposition of calls, isn't it? Because the lad in Liverpool puts himself very much to the left of centre, and he's not voting Labour. I don't know what he is voting for. The ghost of Jeremy Corbyn, I suspect. But you are describing yourself as right of centre, and you're describing yourself as voting Labour, and did indeed yesterday. Brent, thank you. And that is really interesting. You can talk about the political order being shaken up. You can talk about Starmer taking votes for granted, which I think is probably a mistake. But you can also talk about him winning the votes of people who wouldn't previously have contemplated voting for him. But I don't know how long he can hold that coalition together, because, like Brent, I want more movement on the Brexit madness. I'd just like them to tell the truth about it. I think there's one story today, I may have glossed over it, someone, I think a minister, describing it as a delusion, which is nice to see. But, the question of how Farage gets away with associating himself with pretty much everything that's gone wrong in this country, claiming credit for everything that's gone wrong in this country, and then somehow shrugging off all responsibility for what happens when the things he told us to do, or the things he said he wanted, actually happen. It might be part of the same. It might be part of the same problem. The fact that most of the media doesn't tell the truth at the moment about Brexit, or the ghost of Boris Johnson. So where are voters supposed to go? In the question of Brexit, I guess, in the context of this by-election result, the argument must be, there is a good Brexit, but it goes to a different school. Otherwise, the people responsible for delivering it would never get a look in electorally. They must still be perpetuating the myth that it could somehow have gone well. And if anyone's good at perpetuating myths, it's Nigel Farage. It is coming up to 10:30. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I like this from Matt. James, Keir Starmer isn't the problem. We are. We're so used to bombastic politicians and policies that promote nothing but empty promises. Farage and Badenoch give empty promises. We've had so long since a Brexit of falsehoods. We're just not used to day-to-day boring politics. Boris Johnson was the apotheosis of this. Someone should write a book about what's been done to this country. Someone did, Matt, as I think you might be generously alluding to. But, I write a book called How They Broke Britain, and explain how things got so bad so fast. And then Farage goes on the campaign trail with the slogan that Britain is broken. That's what I mean about this incredible ability to sort of disassociate himself from all of the things that he's contributed to. We may talk about that in the next hour, but in this hour, it's all about Starmer. Or is it? Thomas Watts has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10:32. Let me just deal with a little bit of, I don't know if it's criticism, but Ollie writes, you are playing into the hands of those that never wanted a Labour government in the first place. There's a reason parliaments are every 5 years. It's because change takes time that the right-wing media were never going to give a Labour government, let alone Keir Starmer. David Cameron came in 2010 and was allowed to carry out austerity for 5 years. Only in the second term he faced any really meaningful criticism, but Starmer has faced it since day one. Listen, you can have that point, Ollie. Absolutely. But I don't think I am falling into any trap. I'm interested in what people think and why. For example, Steve in Liverpool, the first caller, wanting more socialism. And in fact, I misspoke or misremembered. Keir Starmer has described himself as a socialist. And I guess the nationalisation or renationalisation of the railways and the purchase of British Steel, or rather taking over of British Steel, suggests that he does quite like the idea of social ownership of the means of production as opposed to private ownership. But if that was your politics, you probably wouldn't feel that he'd gone far enough. His defence would be, I can't afford to at the moment. I have to prioritise the country over the party. But this is what he said last year. I would describe myself as a socialist. I describe myself as a progressive. I describe myself as somebody who always puts the country first and party second. Kevin says he's not communicating any hope. There might be something in that. But the problem is that hopium is a very addictive drug, but it's a very dangerous one. The people who promise you the earth, jam tomorrow, apple pie, rarely turn out to have your best interests at heart. But that notion there of a failure of communication, I don't know who gets the blame for that. A lot of people who are very politically engaged talk a lot about his key consigliere Morgan McSweeney, but how many people in Runcorn even knew the name of Morgan McSweeney? The clever clogs on social media, the political correspondents, I mean that affectionately, talk about how everyone's briefing against Ed Miliband now, and Ed Miliband's going to get the blame for everything, and possibly tensions between him and the leader. Who in Runcorn cares about that? Answer, I think nobody. 10:35 is the time. Alan is in Sheffield. Alan, what would you like to say?
Yeah, I mean, I was actually out canvassing in Doncaster for several weeks on the doorstep, and what we did out there was I certainly apologised for the winter fuel allowance and thought it was a misstep. And what I was faced with on not one but several occasions is it's not about the winter fuel allowance, it's because you let too many blacks in. And then yesterday on the doorstep, I actually had a pensioner woman saying, you've let all these men of fighting age in who are going to rape our women. Now that's directly, fighting age is directly a quote from Farage's party political broadcast about 2 weeks ago on the BBC that I saw. So that's what we're facing. What Reform have done, I believe, is they've given an element of the voters the permission to be racist in a way that they wouldn't have done 2 years ago, certainly not 5 years ago. You know, you would never have heard that knocking on the door, somebody saying, you've let too many blacks in.
So they might have thought it, but they wouldn't have said it.
They would never have said it in a million years. And that's what we're facing now. And, you know, Doncaster, I mean, I'm from Sheffield, a lot of people in Sheffield went across to Doncaster to try and save that seat because Doncaster is potentially a fantastic city with the airport, the rail links and all the rest of it. My first
home was in Doncaster.
But it's been badly served by politicians over the last 20, 30 years. But, you know, Ros winning by, was it 700 votes, was amazing. Now, we may still lose the council, but what we're faced with, and I don't know how Starmer can deal with this, is inherent racism stoked by the media and particularly by Farage and his people.
What's that noise?
It's my dog in the park.
Oh, how lovely. Has he got a whistle?
No, I'm just throwing it away. She was actually on the doorstep yesterday. I'm getting her credit for actually turning at least 3 people to vote Labour.
Oh, that's nice. Everyone should take a dog with them when they're canvassing. Here's the problem, though, because what you say is demonstrably true. You know, as with Donald Trump, you take away the racism, there's almost nothing left.
Yeah.
And that appeals to people. They have been successfully persuaded that they are somehow under threat from people in small boats or from people fleeing Afghanistan or Syria or sundry other war zones and hellholes. And sometimes Starmer gives the impression that he's given up on that argument.
Yeah.
But do you win those votes back by calling them racist? This is, you know...
No, you can't. I mean, that's the problem. You know, we've got to try and win these people over because these were traditional Labour voters. You know, if you look at some of the elections when that clown Johnson was in charge, we had mining areas like Maltby. You know, during the miners' strike, I was out in Maltby quite a lot. Mining families voting for a Tory.
Isn't it? It's about breaking things. It's the more unhappy you are, the more disillusioned you are.
Yeah.
The more likely you are to vote to break stuff. So we broke the European Union. We left the European Union. And then come 2019, nothing's changed. Things are still awful. Let's do it again. So I see the 2019 general election as actually the second Brexit referendum. I think most people do, regardless of what side of the argument you're on. And what we're seeing now, potentially, with reform on the march, what we're seeing now is the third. So let's have another go. Let's smash our head against that brick wall for the third time. Things will get better if we say Yabu sucks to the tradition, the status quo, whatever you want to call it, the establishment. And how much of that is what you could describe as a kind of incoherent frustration, which everyone can sympathise with and understand. And how much of it is actually the lines that you hear on the doorstep? How much of it is a successful mission to persuade people in Britain that the source of their problems is people that have come here from somewhere else, in much the same way that in the United States of America, Donald Trump has successfully persuaded millions of people, even as he tanks their economy, that the real problem in the country is people that came here from somewhere else. Is it? I mean, do we waste our time overthinking this stuff when it just boils down to always immigration?
No, I think what we've got, I mean, some positives out of this. Hope Not Hate, who are a fantastic organisation. They campaigned their socks off in Doncaster and produced, pen portraits of 7 of the Reform candidates, which showed them to be extremely nasty people. And I think that helped to get the vote out. I think some people voted Labour who are not natural Labour supporters because they couldn't stand the idea of, people who thought Hitler was good or people who wanted Somalis thrown out of planes to become councillors.
Yes.
And that's what Hope Not Hate did.
And Hope Not Hate should not be doing that alone. I mean, this should be national news, and it isn't. It wasn't last time. It wasn't when UKIP were on the march. It was usually Farage turns up in a studio and gets his toes tickled. Something I still don't understand, because you'd have thought that there would be more mileage in revealing these kind of associations and these kind of pasts. But so how much of it's on Starmer then? I mean, because I get the stuff I get the racism. It's been very carefully nurtured. You think back to the Breaking Point poster on the morning that Joe Cox was assassinated by a white supremacist terrorist, and they couldn't wait to start revving up that kind of rhetoric again, almost before the poor woman had been buried. So we know what they're made of, and we know that a significant proportion of the population either loves it or doesn't care enough to be repelled by it. But how much of what's happening at the moment is on Starmer for you? Part
of it, I think, because he's not got the personality to be a charismatic leader in an age when people want charismatic leaders. But we've made missteps. The winter fuel allowance, which I was a beneficiary of, was a mistake. We shouldn't have cut it, or we should have means tested it. I'm on a good pension. I don't need the winter fuel allowance. But when we're on the doorstep and people are using it as a way of attacking the party for $2.5 billion, which isn't exactly a lot of money in the meaner things. We shouldn't have done that. Disability is much more complicated because
of course it is.
It requires a whole examination. But the problem is now, both in the party and in general, there's certain areas that you just can't go to because you're seen as being, a reactionary if you even talk about looking at disability benefits, which, I think we need to look at. Or, I used to be a university lecturer. The whole university system is falling apart and it's not fit for purpose. But, we need to do that. But Starmer as the figurehead will always be the lightning rod, which attracts it. But I think, in the next couple of years, we've got 4 years yet, Rachel Reeves will be moved in the next 18 months, I would suggest. West Streeting will be on manoeuvres. And it might be possible, as you said, with Carol Vorderman, that Keir doesn't go into the next election and West Streeting takes us into the next election.
She didn't say West Streeting, actually.
No. But
do you know who she said?
No.
Well, I'm not going to tell you. I'm going to build up a bit of I'll tell you in the next segment of the programme. I'm going to build up a little bit of tension. In fact, people can have a guess on 84850 or 03456060973. The thing is, and I don't know how true you think this is, that you wait for something and then there comes a moment where you have to accept perhaps that it's never going to happen. So this idea that Keir Starmer's going to find a gear, a way of melding government and campaigning, or of being better at communicating, or of getting messages out there about things like workers' rights and various other policies that people like you can be proud of and can take to the doorstep and can tell people about. How long's he got before people decide that? Go on.
2 years. I mean, I think we've got in the Labour Party, we're going to be careful what we wish for. A lot of us wanted Blair to go, and we got Brown. Was that a good idea?
Well, I talk a lot off air about sexy leaders. And Blair was a sexy leader. He was possibly the last sexy leader. Brown was definitely not. For Tories, I think Cameron was. It's hard to believe now, but he was young and fresh-faced. Yeah. And I guess in the context of electability, Blair was probably better than Brown. But I don't know that. I think that Brown's one of the most maligned political figures of the last 30 years. I mean, he effectively saved the world from the global financial crisis in 2008, and most of our newspapers still blame him for it. It's incredible.
No, I mean, I think the problem is, Brown, a bit like Starmer, doesn't fit into the modern age of multimedia and all the rest of it, social media. But the problem is, none of our, imagine Attlee, imagine Churchill, I think the problem, not to be cynical about this, but the problem isn't politicians, the problem is voters.
Yes, I mean, it's always been the case, hasn't it? And voters are a fascinating bunch. We all are, We all sometimes let our feelings overcome our facts. Luke's been in touch. He says, you're exactly why people go to vote, because people like you and the extreme left just call Reform voters racist and thick. Please keep it up, because you're in for a big shock come the next general election. Well, it won't be a big shock any more than Brexit would be a big shock, Luke. And people like you, whether you're racist or thick or both, I don't know. But if you honestly believe that meaningless rhetoric or policies built entirely on a promise to be horrible to people that you've been persuaded you don't like is going to improve your life, then you're just wrong. Racist and thick are words I can't apply unless you ring in and have a chat with me, and we can work it out for ourselves. But you're wrong. Just as deporting Venezuelans in the United States of America is somehow going to make Americans wealthier. It just isn't. But if it makes you feel good in that moment, then I suppose it's mission accomplished. And if it makes other people feel bad, if cruelty and prejudice make other people feel bad, that probably makes you feel good too. And that's part of politics. That's what Alan's talking about. Or your vote is worth the same as somebody who understands stuff. It just is. That's the nature of democracy.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:48 is the time. So here's a thought. Let's pretend, because they haven't played an absolute blinder. There's nobody's going to claim that Labour have come out of the blocks in government and got absolutely everything right, or undertaken a programme of enormous success. But let's pretend that they had. Where would you find out about it? Where would you go? Where do you think you'd see the reports? Well, let's look at some of the things that they have done, for example. So we haven't had, and never say never, but the frequency with which some of our most treasured fellow citizens were compelled to go on strike has almost disappeared. I know they're constantly talking about strikes, and if you were in Birmingham waiting to have your rubbish taken away, you'd probably struggle to recognise the broader reality. But the resident doctors, which is the artists formerly known as junior doctors, they're not on strike. They haven't been on strike since Labour got in. Nurses are no longer on strike. The NHS seems to be a happier place. A lot of public sector pay had fallen behind the private sector, and that has been addressed. Speaking of pay, the poorest people in the country are now better off. Minimum wage raised for 3 million low-paid workers. Triple lock still in place for 13 million state pensioners. Of course, the winter fuel allowance being linked to other benefit rates hit others, but, there are positives there, particularly for the lowest paid workers in the country. And in fact, all workers benefit from the Employment Rights Bill. It shifts power away from employers and gives some of it back to workers on things like flexibility, equality, dismissal, and family-friendly policies. There's quite a lot going on in the area of workers' rights. NHS funding has been restored. I mean, it is a money machine, the NHS, but they've restored spending to the highest level since 2010 after 14 years of seeing spending not at the levels it was at in 2010. If you're a tenant, you're a lot safer, potentially, under Labour. You've got a lot more security as a tenant. Housing and planning reform kicking in. The Renters' Rights Bill delivering potentially important protections to renters. The water industry facing some meaningful regulation for the first time in a million years. Whether it goes far enough, time will tell. But, we could go on. A lot of people like the environmental policies that Labour are introducing, but you'd never know that looking at the media. Great British Energy is a fairly big and bold thing to be established. It's £8.3 billion worth of spending, and public transport has improved. The government has launched a number of measures to reduce violence against women and girls, something that everybody claims to care passionately about, and everybody certainly should. And if, these are things that you care about, you would perhaps struggle to know about them. I mean that. Imagine if the current Labour government was the best government in a billion years. How would you know? Where would you go? Do you think, for example, that the kind of people who like to invite Nigel Farage onto their programmes to tickle his toes would tell you? Do you think the Daily Mail would tell you? Do you think the Daily Telegraph would tell you? Because some people are upset about these policies, usually the wealthiest people in the country. They read a hell of a lot about farmers having to pay half the inheritance tax that everybody else in the country has to pay, as if that's some grievous crime against humanity. You read a hell of a lot about people with kids at private school having to pay VAT on the school fees. Where would you hear about a good thing that Labour... Where would you go to hear about that? Daily Telegraph, Daily Mail, LBC, BBC, ITV, GBBs, Sky? Where would you hear it? Where would you actually get a nicely balanced picture of what is good and what is bad? Have a little think about that. Because we still live in a country where almost all of the engines of propaganda or information, or whatever you'd prefer to call it, remain in place after bringing you austerity, Brexit, Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, and the rest of it. They're still in place. It's a bloody miracle sometimes that Labour got in. You look back on the climate in which they got. How bad did the Tories have to get before Labour could get in? I mean, unbelievably and unspeakably bad. But it's amazing how quickly memories fade, isn't it? 10:53 is the time. Is Starmer the problem, though? Jack is in Bromley. Jack, what do you think?
Well, I initially called in and mentioned the point about his past comments about whether or not he's a socialist, and that since you've mentioned on air that he impacted the time of his leadership.
Describes himself. I mean, it's one of those words that people who use it as a pejorative can very rarely tell you what it means. But generally speaking, he describes himself as a socialist. Has described himself as a socialist, and this would mean that the means of production are socially owned. So the state, the people, the government, whatever you want to call it, owns more of the means of production.
Yes. I voted for Starmer in the leadership election in 2020. I sort of heard the sort of noises he was making in those kind of directions about being a unity candidate and, left-wing policies and nationalisation and these kind of things, which are kind of ideas I believe in. And I took him at his word that those were the sorts of things he believed in too. And I thought at the time, there were a lot of sort of, the sort of Corbyn supporters who I would look at saying, no, this Starmer can't be trusted. He's, a really sort of on the right of the Labour Party. He doesn't really believe any of the stuff he's saying. And I thought at the time, he can't possibly be being, so dishonest, but he must believe some of this stuff because he just keeps saying it.
So
all through
what do you think he
leadership
should have
election.
nationalised?
I think there's arguments in favour of nationalising all kinds of things, and certainly not letting more things slip into private hands.
They're nationalising the railways. That for me would have been one of the biggest. The NHS remains nationalised. So what else do you think? And they're looking pretty close to nationalising British Steel. What else would you like them to nationalise?
Well, I guess it would be things like sort of the water and energy, looking at those kind of industries and how they're currently. They've set up Great British Energy. That's £8.3 billion for a nationalised energy provider. They're trying to build one. If I'm not mistaken, though, that's not the same as nationalising the energy system.
And how do we pay for that? How much do we pay the people that currently own it, Jack?
Yeah, but I mean, so James,
I'm going to push you to answer these questions.
Yeah.
How much do we pay the people that currently own these assets? The market rate, or do we steal them?
Right, but James, I'm not an economist. The point I'm calling in about is the things that Keir Starmer said he believed in.
And I'm wondering what you think he could have nationalised. Because, of course, the answer to your question is, well, if he could afford it, then he would have done.
Yeah.
So how would he afford to nationalise energy? Let's say he wanted to buy British gas. How much would we pay for that, do you think?
But James, I
but this is, Jack, this is the absolute essence. This is the essence of Corbyn versus Starmer. So he should have done this, that and the other, but I've got absolutely no idea whether that's even possible, affordable or plausible. Please stop bullying me.
Right, but James, it's the things he said when he was elected.
What he said since
is
that he can't afford to do a lot of the things that he would like to do as a socialist.
Sure, but the conversation is about Starmer and his position as Labour leader as today. So my point that I'm calling up about is that he has perhaps eroded some of his credibility, and it's perhaps credibility that he thought he might be losing just with sort of left-wing people, Corbyn supporters. But is it possible, James, that his other people, a wider cohort of people, have noticed that Starmer says one thing and then seems to do a different thing?
That might be possible. I mean, although, of course, you get a lot of lies surrounding the Farage riots and so-called two-tier justice. I mean, that is the same narrative, whether you like it or not, and I suspect you probably don't like it. That's the same narrative that you're supporting, that this notion of dishonesty or this notion of hypocrisy. But I'm fascinated by the nationalisation question, because I think that a wealthy Labour government would actually renationalise. Under Keir Starmer would renationalise if it could, quite a lot of the things that we're talking about. And it's why it's not a gotcha or a leading question. It's something he has tried to address. And it takes me back to this question of where would you actually find out the information you need to have a fully informed position. We cannot afford to do these things, is his defence. So they're doing it to railways. They're trying to do it to steel. They're offering options. They're spending serious money on energy in an attempt to have a nationalised energy provider. I do insist on you telling me something you think they could realistically nationalise now.
Yeah, James, my gripes...
there isn't. You can't, can you?
Well, look, if I happen to be trying to express my point and mention the word nationalisation, that is not that I want to, set out how I have. But
I hear it a lot. Maybe I'm unfairly casting you as the great champion of nationalisation. But I hear it a lot from certain corners, if you like, of the electorate. I don't want to badger you, but you can't name anything, can you, that could be realistically nationalised tomorrow?
Well, I mean, I have. I've not tomorrow. I'm certainly not claiming anything can be immediately nationalised tomorrow. But I think people listening will recognise that they can hear that I've called in to discuss Starmer, which is the topic of the conversation, and you're pivoting away from Starmer's track record on the question of honesty towards a specific policy agenda, which I.
That was your example of his dishonesty, though.
It wasn't my one example.
Okay, sorry. What else is there?
Word I mentioned. Well, so, other things that I have, I was a Labour member under Starmer. Like I say, I voted for Starmer to become Labour leader. I then resigned my membership. Some other things I'm deeply unhappy about in the way that he's leading the Labour Party would be things like Gaza, things like trans healthcare, and also the disability benefit cuts that are sort of in the works at the moment as well. Those are some
not
other
what you expected
key
at all.
issues.
And I think you highlight exactly the problem he's got, don't you? Because if you are going to the country on any of the issues that you've just mentioned, and against the backdrop of the media ecosystem that I've been describing in this last part of this hour, he's kind of given up on a lot of those causes because he thinks the arguments have been lost.
Yeah, and that's the thing that really dispirits me, because I think what I'm concerned about is that the strategy of trying to chase, to concede the Overton window, as it were, to sort of move ever further in the direction of reform, to kind of like be on the chase rather than on the offensive, with being able to set your own agenda as the government. That's the thing that concerns me, is that he doesn't seem to have the desire to sort of be bold and to set the agenda and to take the debate on his terms. He seems to be chasing a losing debate.
Yeah, I agree with that.
With some nasty people who will just keep getting nastier and nastier.
And you can't win that. You can never satisfy those appetites. The people that Alan was telling us about on the doorsteps in Doncaster, talking about them letting too many blacks in. You can make all the announcements you want on immigration, but you're never going to be able to take away the impulses that drive those thoughts, unless, Jack, and this would be the plan, I suppose, unless people feel better off. And if people feel better off, then they are a lot less susceptible to this sort of bile, this sort of poison. I don't want to over-egg the Irish pudding, but one of the main reasons why the last the last Irish election didn't go in the way that some people had predicted and didn't become all about immigration was because people in Ireland generally feel better off than they do in the UK. So that might be one way to diffuse some of the toxicity that you describe. But there's not much sign of that happening anytime soon. It is 11:01. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I don't even know whether it would be popular electorally. Nigel Farage wants to abolish the NHS, wants to privatise it. So, and he's doing all right at the moment. So announcing that you're going to nationalise more stuff, would it matter? Would it make a difference? I don't know. It'd be nice to see them try, though. It's 11:02.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 5 minutes after 11. This is good from Nina. This came in just after I introduced the last news. Hi, James. I think the essence is that we don't feel better off, even if some are. The streets are still dirty. The prisons are full, with many who should not be in there. Planning and leasehold reforms are slow and murky, to say the least, and our politicians give us doom-laden messages of more hardship before things improve, when most of us don't have the luxury of time in the face of rising bills. It's all about the personal, because the personal is the national. Starmer looks unprepared for anything other than being a friend of Ukraine. And in 4 years' time, that won't win the election. Now, I'd read that out, because Nina sent that after I ran through that list of things that you could realistically describe as achievements of the current government. But the scenario that Nina describes, I wonder whether it really touches the sides. I don't know. Which brings us to the big winner in yesterday's votes, which is Nigel Farage and his reform outfit. And here's a question I don't think we've asked before. And, as the latest vehicle that he drives achieves a little bit more velocity than any of the previous vehicles, I think it is probably the time to ask it. And we've done it a bit with Trump. I wonder if the answers will turn out to be the same. So just off the top of my head, and in no particular order, Farage is the man who did a deal that brought Boris Johnson into Downing Street, described Boris Johnson's Brexit deal in very glowing terms, described Liz Truss's budget, the one that brought the country to the brink of absolute catastrophe, as the finest thing. I think the finest Tory budget since 1985, but for the benefit of shorthand, we'll just say the best thing since sliced bread, shall we? He, of course, was a key architect of Brexit, which I read yesterday is responsible at the moment for 1,500 deaths a year, simply as a consequence of the number of qualified medical staff that left the country. You know what it's done to GDP. We heard earlier in the week from the biggest berry producer in the country, who's watching tons and tons of stock rot in the fields because of the red tape that has been introduced as a consequence of Farage telling people that if they left the European Union, there'd be less red tape. He thinks Vladimir Putin is the most admirable politician in the world. He is the politician politician that Farage admires the most, the murderous dictator in the Kremlin, who of course sent goons to this country to kill British citizens. But hey ho, that's all good. That's all impressive in the Farage verse. And that's off the top of my head. You can probably think of other things as well. He unveiled that disgusting poster, which had very strong Nazi echoes, on the morning that the Labour politician Joe Cox was assassinated by a white supremacist terrorist, and never really demonstrated a moment of reflection, let alone remorse, for letting those thoughts run freely, letting that kind of bile run freely through the population. And naive snowflakes like me think that all of that stuff would make him toxic. And you could just pick one of them, couldn't you, in normal political circumstances and conclude that makes somebody toxic. Just pick the Putin stuff. There was also a story I think there was a story at one point about claiming he'd never met the Russian ambassador and challenges to that claim emerging. But I can't remember everything. I'm good, but I'm not that good. He gets a whole chapter in How They Broke Britain, where we go through all of the things that he has been responsible for or not responsible for. And that is where the question becomes quite personal. And I don't know that it is quite the same question that we've asked about Donald Trump. Why is he never held responsible for the things that he's done? How does he get away with everything from telling people that Brexit was going to be brilliant, to telling people that Liz Truss's budget was a stroke of economic genius, to telling people that Vladimir Putin is the most admirable politician in the world, the politician he admires most in the world, and then, of course, lying about it? Maybe we should have got some clips together for this hour so that we could really just drive home the way in which he does disgusting things and lies. Because I don't know. I don't like some of the answers to this question, and you possibly won't like them either. He helped to stir up the riots, I think, in the summer, didn't he, by using Andrew Tate, the alleged rapist and people trafficker, as a news source when he spends so much of his time castigating actual journalists who try in increasingly difficult circumstances to do a decent job. And, of course, we haven't mentioned his fandom of Donald Trump, a man who is crashing the American economy, attacking Britain in various ways. Elon Musk, of course, who's telling all sorts of lies on social media about this country. He describes himself as a friend of J.D. Vance since 2012. J.D. Vance claiming that British police officers implementing British laws in Britain are more of a threat to us than China or Russia or any of the actual international threats that this country faces. All of this. Now, I don't want to be rude and say that a lot of people who vote, because I think we can all agree that if you vote Reform, you're voting for Farage. You're not voting for the candidate in that more than any other party, perhaps at the moment. It's a kind of one-man band. It's very much that the figurehead is the story. How many people know all the stuff that I've just listed? I mean, Anthony makes a point that he gets away with it because so many of your peers give him a platform and credibility. Well, I don't know how would you do it? If you were minded to have him on your show all the time, would you remind him of all of these things every time he came through the door? I would, but that's why he's never going to come through the door again. That's how it works. If you want access to politicians, you have to go. Unless you're in government, you have to go a little bit easier on them, perhaps. I don't know how it works. It's why you don't hear many politicians on this program. It's not usually a kind of a trough that we have our noses in. But all of those things that I've just listed off the top of my head, and goodness knows what else we could put on the list, would make somebody ordinarily politically toxic. Start with Putin. Factor in Brexit. Throw in a little bit of Donald Trump. Donald Trump's approval ratings in this country are incredibly low. Have a look at the Liz Truss economic catastrophe, which he thought was a stroke of genius. How does he get away with... It's like McCavity, isn't he? The mystery cat. So McCavity's not there. All of the things that he would chalk up as achievements have turned out to be disasters, or all of the associations and admirations that he professes to hold have turned out to be hideous. Imagine describing Vladimir Putin as the politician you admire most in the world. And yet, although the negativity polling is spectacular. He is also a populist politician. And the line between populist and popular is often vanishingly thin. So that's the only question I want you to zone in on. It's not what the appeal is, although it may turn out that question has the same answer as the question that I'm actually going to ask you. But how has he managed over the course of the last 10 years, because Brexit was 2016, the referendum. So the run up to that, 2015, 2014 when he last came into this studio. And I think you'd allow me to suggest that I demonstrated how easy it is to show him for exactly what he is. So much so that, of course, that his own publicist dragged him out of the studio by his jacket lapels. How has he managed to avoid responsibility for all of the stuff that he's ushered in? I mean, he repeatedly demonstrates himself. He repeatedly shows himself to be either not very bright in terms of the Liz Truss moment, not very patriotic in terms of the Vladimir Putin moment, and not very right in terms of Brexit. He's arguably giving Daniel Hannan competition for being the wrongest man in Britain. So how does he get... And also, is this the same phone-in that we had about Boris Johnson and Donald Trump? It is, isn't it? But will it have different answers? How can somebody whose track record is so obviously hideous enjoy any support, but crucially with Farage, not bear any responsibility for the things that he's actually done? That's what I want to know. So if you were thinking of voting for someone, you'd look at their track record, right? And you'd think, I'm not going to do that. This is the guy I trusted when I voted to leave the European Union. This is the guy I trusted when I bet the house on Liz Truss being an economic genius. This is the guy I trusted when Boris Johnson became Prime Minister in 2019 because he stepped aside, didn't he? He did a sort of pact, an unofficial pact with the Tories to stand down candidates in the constituencies where the Tories were likely to win. And that swept Boris Johnson all the way to Downing Street. So why? Why don't people hold him responsible for any of that? If you're one of them, I'd love to hear your answers. I don't get the calls I used to get from that section of society, but I never say never. I'm never going to give up. My door is always open. My phone lines are always at your disposal. Why don't you mind about all that stuff? You don't mind about being a Vladimir Putin fanboy. You don't mind about his economic genius being such that he thought Liz Truss was brilliant. You don't mind about the fact that Brexit has turned out to be none of the things that he said it would be. Why? Why don't you? 0345 60 60973. And if, like me, you're trying to work it out from the outside, then join me in speculating on what it is. As with Boris Johnson, as with Donald Trump, what does he offer to people that allows them to ignore all of the obvious evidence that he is, at best ridiculous and at worst dangerous? It's 11:16. The phone lines are open. He's even brought Andrea Jenkins back into public life, one of the most hideous remnants of Boris Johnson's premiership. It's extraordinary, right? What is it that they offer people that means they can turn off their normally reliable sensibilities on issues like being an admirer of our worst international enemies and being an enthusiast for self-imposed economic disaster, whether it's Brexit or Liz Truss, or both? 0345 6060 973. It's 11:16.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:18, and I should have mentioned that later this hour we will speak to two doctors who are treating the first children to come here from Gaza for desperate treatment, for emergency treatment, and it's private medical treatment. It is entirely funded by donations. And it is extraordinary to me that these are the first children to be granted temporary UK visas since that war broke out in October of 2023 in the aftermath of the terrorist atrocity that Hamas inflicted upon Israel. Of course, the death toll now far dwarfs the hideous figures from that day. The overall death toll of dead Palestinians is, you heard Kenneth Roth, the former executive of Human Rights Watch, on last week's Full Disclosure, explain why he's comfortable using the word genocide to describe what has happened subsequently. So it does rather pose the question of why only two children have been brought here for treatment. since that war began. Anyway, we'll meet the doctors later this hour. Before that, we ask a question that is similar to questions that we've asked before, albeit with a different focus on this occasion. Why does Nigel Farage not appear to carry any responsibility for his own past? Whether it's his some very questionable associations, of course, that have been well documented, but crucially, since he became a, quotes, politician, end quotes, why do none of the things that he's done or supported hang around? Why does it all wash off him like water off a duck's back? Chris is in Alton. Chris, what would you like to say?
Well, I think the reason that he gets away with it is because he hasn't been the person implementing the policies which he has espoused. So he is always able to say, well, if I'd been doing it, I would have implemented the policy differently and it would have worked.
And people don't pay enough attention to realise that usually when he does that, he's lying. Because because for example, on Boris Johnson's Brexit deal, he was like a dog with two tails.
But the thing is that people are not looking at that. What people are voting for when they vote for him is that he is expressing their frustration and their anger. So he's appealing to their emotional response to the economic circumstances they find themselves in. Their standard of living is going down. Their wages are not keeping up with prices. The redistribution of the national income, which has been going on for years from people who work to people who own things, is still continuing now. Rents have gone up by another 10%.
But he's not.
The minimum wage
he's not going to come in and he's not going to go anywhere and be the scourge of landlords and the wealthy, is he?
Absolutely not.
He's touring. Go on.
He doesn't have to. All he has to do is say, "I feel your pain and I'm on your side," and that's all people hear.
But doesn't he also need to
the rest of it?
Yeah, but whose fault are the problems you describe? Who is responsible for the diminishment in people's living standards?
Well, that's the thing. The Tories, the Labour Party, the media, everybody who is on board with the neoliberal economics, which are designed almost to enrich the rich at the expense of everybody else.
But he calls himself a Thatcherite.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter, does it? I mean, this is where the Trump stuff...
Trick.
We're bringing the same tools to the analysis that we would bring to normal politicians, whereas, in fact, people who like as Donald Trump shows, people who lie very easily are immune to traditional analysis. Boris Johnson showed us that. People whose relationship with the truth is at best strained, at worst broken. We still don't know how to deal with it. We still don't know how to process it.
He is a Thatcherite. They're all Thatcherites. Keir Starmer is a Thatcherite. they're all still pursuing this myth that if you keep cutting taxes for the rich, they will invest in the economy and everything will be fine and dandy. What actually happens is they invest in inflating asset bubbles and not in the real productive economy, and ordinary people get poorer.
No, I'm not disputing your economic analysis, but Starmer is not achieving. He's not being forgiven for everything that he's done. So we come back to your original point, is that Farage has never actually been in charge of anything, and therefore he's not held responsible for anything.
No, well, Starmer is catching a cold.
But Trump was, though. Trump's been responsible for lots of things and still isn't held responsible for them. He's trying to blame Biden for the economic slump that he's just brought about with his tariffs.
Well, not specifically Biden, but I think Sanders would have done a lot better.
No. Trump has tried to blame Biden for it. I'm doing a gig with Bernie Sanders next month, actually. Remind me to tell you the details. Chris, thank you. 23 minutes after 11 is the time. Why does somebody whose track record in objective terms is hilariously bad? It makes Daniel Hannan look like Aristotle. Wrong about almost everything. Or, I mean, maybe he means it. Maybe he does think that Vladimir Putin is the most admirable politician on the planet. Maybe he loves him. We know that he loves Trump. I heard him being interviewed earlier saying every council needs a Doge. So I know this would sound a little odd, but the more exposure we have to this party actually being in charge of something, the better perhaps it would prove for the country, because he can say every council needs a Doge, presumably knowing exactly who he's talking to, without mentioning that under most analyses, Elon Musk's Doge, after 100 days of activity, has not done a fraction of the things that it promised to do, and quite possibly cost more than it's saved. So who lives in an area where they think the council needs less money? Who lives in an area where the council needs less money? Because that's what you're going to get, apparently, judging by this morning's interviews. Sophie is in Burgess Hill. Sophie, what would you like to say?
Hi.
Hello.
I do really put this down to just the noise out there. There's so much to pay attention to and so much to listen to that I feel like the politics at the moment are doing exactly what Donald Trump is doing, is just bombarding people with information that they can't keep track of everything. And so they pick the information that they think is going to impact them the most, like lots of young people voting for reform because they think they're not going to get taxed up to £20,000. That's not costed. There's no evidence that's even achievable, that it would be successful. But there's too much to listen to, and they look for their media on social media. They go to social media and they read opinion pieces with titles that are dramatic and influential, and they think that it's good enough source of news.
I'm trying to wonder what an equivalent from the left would look like. So, somebody who had said that about Vladimir Putin, but was from the left wing. And I know there were concerns about Seamus Milne's views of the Kremlin when he was advising Jeremy Corbyn, but the idea of a left-wing politician talking about Vladimir Putin being the politician he admired most in the world, I don't think that he would ever, or she would ever, be able to shake that off if they were from the left of British politics.
I think people on the left, generally on social opinion or anything, don't get forgiven for the statements that are being made. Whether you're talking about Gaza, whether you're talking about the environmental impact of everything, I don't think the left gets to put those things down or move on from them as quickly. We get held to it very often.
We're back to the ecosystem, aren't we? In which, imagine if a Labour Chancellor or a Labour Prime Minister had done what Liz Truss did, and the people who cheered it, whether they were in the media or whether they were in politics, now act as if it never happened. It moved on within weeks from that. Whereas Gordon Brown, in the ecosystem we inhabit, people still talk about his decision to sell off the gold or to sell off some of our gold reserves at a time when the price later went up. It's incredible when you think about it, that the Truss stuff, Farage can do a little sort of dance, do agadoo in the corner of a studio describing Liz Truss's budget as brilliant, and none of it sticks, none of it matters. So, I mean, in percentage terms, how much of this is down to the media?
And most of it. This is all down to the media, because people don't actually read manifestos. People don't actually read the politics. They don't look at the history of politicians' opinions. Otherwise, they'd be appalled. They're just too bombarded. There's too much going on, and people just get bogged down.
Sophie, you'll be telling me next that he turned up at Evgeny Lebedev's summer party wearing Union Jack shoes and drinking champagne with Rupert Murdoch.
I don't know. I don't know. I hear the youngsters who are voting for reform, and it shocks me that they're paying so little attention to what's actually going on.
So what are they getting?
They're just bored of the left.
That's interesting.
They're bored of the left. They are appalled at Conservatives, and Liberal Democrats aren't doing anything. And the Greens just don't have enough experience. So the only option is reform, in their opinion. So
anyone who wants change, and that's why I do wonder whether or not we are going to see the third Brexit referendum on the horizon. I mean, in a way, I guess Runcorn yesterday. I don't know. But feel free to make this conversation more complicated. A couple of phone lines free. Well said, Sophie, says Alan. 0345 6060 973 is the number. Do you want pedant of the day? This is quality. When I do pedant of the day, which I've never actually done before, but I'm doing it now, I do it affectionately. I like pedantry. Some of the hairs you split, not least of the way I pronounce things. It's an absolute art form. But Rin's been in touch to say, Union flag shoes, James. Union Jacks are only on the sea. And that's absolutely true. But, it's all very well describing Vladimir Putin as the politician you admire most in the world, hanging out with the son of a KGB spy and Rupert Murdoch while wearing Union flag shoes. Since when was that acceptable for a British politician? I wasn't making that up, by the way. Farage has done it. So why does none of this matter to people? Why does it not matter to you or your mum? Actually, if you're not going to ring me yourself, maybe we can do a second-hand one. What is it that people get in return for closing their eyes or blocking their ears to all of this incontrovertible evidence? Because these, of course, are not opinions. I am not offering opinions. I am just counting. Thomas Watts has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
11:32 is the time. I think Matthew in Gloucester has just wrested the pedant of the day crown from Rin. He's been in touch to say Union flag and Union Jack are interchangeable, James. This comes from the Admiralty over 100 years ago, if we are being truly pedantic. Thank you very much. And I just had a little crisis of confidence then. I didn't think anyone had correctly guessed who Carol Vorderman told me in January she thought would lead the Labour Party into the next general election. And Eleanor suggested that means no one listens to Full Disclosure, which I thought was a bit disloyal and frankly unfriendly. But so I got Keith to remind me how I can search for things in my inbox. So I can search for keywords in my inbox now. And quite a lot of you got it right. Whether you were guessing or whether it was the fact that you had actually listened to the question, I listened to the podcast, listened to the interview, I will never know. But the answer is Peter Kyle, which very few people guessed correctly, but still plenty, still enough to calm my fevered brow and remove the thought that there would be evidence there that you hadn't listened to. God forbid that you hadn't listened to Full Disclosure. Who are we releasing today? No one tells me anything around here. Do we know who we're... that's going to be a treat. I'm not going to tell you who it is. I'll give you a clue. It's a puppet. No, I'm not going to tell you who it is. I'm not going to tell you. It's one of the ones I've really enjoyed in recent months. I enjoy all of them, as you know. Some of them are very serious and quite rightly so. Some of them are not. Today is very much a rib tickler. 11:34 is the time. Back to this question of how the Vladimir Putin admiring, Liz Truss fanboy, Brexit architect Nigel Farage can somehow not be held responsible for anything that he's ever done, said, or encouraged you to vote for. John's in Greenwich. John, what do you reckon?
I think, James, that the main reason is charisma. Because for Nigel Farage, he's able to say, oh, well, because look at me, I'm amazing, and Brexit didn't work out because I wasn't in charge and it's everyone else's fault. And he doesn't get challenged by the media, and that is the main issue. And unfortunately,
that's still true. You think that's still... Because, I mean, I know it was true for a long time, but you still don't think he gets properly interviewed by all the people, because he's never off the flipping screen, is he? Or he's never off the radio.
Well, he does by some people. So Sky News, I think, are really, really good. And obviously yourself.
I haven't seen him for 10 years, mate.
When they've questioned him, but whenever he gets those difficult questions, he's like, you're anti-reform, you're anti-this, anti-that. I'm not going to answer the question.
No, and he lies, of course, as well. I remember, I think it was Dimbleby that was pointing out that he'd said Vladimir Putin was the politician he admired most in the world, and he tried to lie and claim that he hadn't said it. And of course, what's fascinating from a media point of view is that unless you've got the clip with you, he gets away with it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think he knows he can get away with it. I think people like Victoria Derbyshire are really good at knowing when she's got people like that and actually coming with the evidence.
Big fan of Victoria's. So you're describing you're describing a weapons grade lack of shame.
Exactly. He's not scared to pretend like nothing's his fault. And I think because people are so desperate and he's so likeable, no matter how much I dislike him or lots of other people.
Some people definitely like him. Yes.
Because of that, people are able to give him the benefit of the doubt and say, do you know what? He says what I think.
The woman that I have talked about a little bit too much in recent weeks, who I encountered when I was doing jury service, who passionately and definitely believed that Michelle Obama was a man and that all the money we've sent to Ukraine had been spent by Volodymyr Zelensky on yachts. She was adamant that Nigel would sort everything out when he got into power. So it's an interesting collection of beliefs. So that idea that you have to be in power. So we needed Brexit to happen before we could see what the reality of Brexit was. He manages to evade that by doing the shaggy bit and claiming it wasn't me. And if I'd been there is a brilliant Brexit, but it goes to a different school. I almost wish, and not all the results are in yet, of course, but I almost wish that they'd won a bit more. Yes, they got a couple of other mayoralties, maybe, so that we'd get a slightly better look at what happens when they are actually in charge. Maybe they'll win a couple of councils and we'll be able to see what actually happens. Because if you think about the party management at the national level, they've already lost one MP and they only had 5 to start with.
Exactly. I think the main benefit of him getting elected and reforming MPs or councillors being elected is people will be able to see what they're doing. So when they're bound by the same things that Labour, Conservative, Lib Dem, Green, SNP
but will they be?
Bound by?
Because then we're back to Trump, aren't we? And the way that he is not responsible for anything that happens, either on his watch. If it's bad, he'll just deny that it's bad. And the earlier caller mentioned Hope Not Hate, and the work that they've done in highlighting the views of some of the candidates that have been standing. He will claim, if anyone asks him about it, and of course there's no guarantee that they will, he will claim that it's nothing to do with him, or that they're more, what's the word you want? One of their candidates in Doncaster posting pictures of Hitler, saying I'm going to use a word. I can't read all of this out. A picture of Hitler, and then a claim using lots of swear words that if he'd chosen Muslims, I guess brackets instead of Jews, close brackets, I would have been an effing legend. This man has posted, one of the group's candidates in Doncaster, not picked up by the vetting procedures. So you've got Nigel Farage leading a party where one of the candidates thinks that Hitler would have been an effing legend if the Holocaust had murdered Muslims instead of Jews. So what happens when someone asks him about that in a studio? He goes, oh, well, some will always slip through the net, or some will always get through it. There's various Andrew Tate and Tommy Robinson admirers. I mean, you can't really beat Hitler, can you, as someone you wouldn't want to be associated with? But that doesn't touch him either, and that's not charisma. And I don't believe people voting for him agree with that comment about Hitler and Muslims. So why does none of that touch him?
I think a lot of it is due to the desperation. Everyone is not in... They're looking for someone who can sort things out. And I think this is one of the problem with populists, is they will always say, I can sort these things out. I am a strong man.
I'm your friend.
I will deal with it. Exactly. And I think that's the main problem, is other parties are not dealing with that to say, if you do that, this is what will happen. So instead, he's able to say, just send people in boats back to France, it's fine. And people go, that's such a simple solution. Not the French will say, I don't think so.
No, well,
that's the issue.
Fascism arrives as your friend. It will restore your honour, make you feel proud, protect your house, give you a job, clean up the neighbourhood, remind you of how great you once were. It's a wonderful poem by Michael Rosen, who's also featured on Full Disclosure, actually. I think I'll read that little bit again. Fascism arrives as your friend. It will restore your honour, make you feel proud, protect your house, give you a job, clean up the neighbourhood, remind you of how great you once were. Sound familiar? Paul's in Bridgewater. Paul, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James. Long time occasional listener.
Someone came up to me at the opera the other night. I wasn't actually at the opera. I was at the Great Gatsby, and they were being absolutely lovely. And I don't know if you've noticed this, Paul. I've got a bit of a grumpy face, even when I'm in a lovely mood. I sometimes look a bit grumpy. If I was a cat, I'd probably be viral. I'd be Grumpy Cat if I was a cat. And so a lovely bloke came up to me at the Great Gatsby, which is a wonderful show. And he said, he was very, it's wonderful to meet you. I love your show. I listen whenever I can. He said, I listen most days.
Yeah.
And I said, in what I hoped was a charming and light-hearted way, I said, what do you mean most days? But obviously I had my grumpy face on because he went, well, I can't listen every day. I've got a job. It was almost like I was attacking him. So when you said occasional then, I resisted the urge to go, what do you mean occasional? Because, yes.
I appreciate that.
You're very welcome.
That. Yeah.
Now, what did you ring in to say?
Yeah, James, I think there's for me, I mean, I don't like Farage, I don't like the policies or any of that stuff he stands for, but as I suppose, as a member of the voting public, I feel like we have collectively allowed this to happen. We don't hold people to account. Yeah. So, he says one thing one day and we maybe get all up in a mess about it, but the next day we've moved on because the next quick fix has been offered to us. And, you see it on social media, you see it across, Amazon. Everything that we want, we can get instantly. So I feel like society is looking for this instantaneous fix. And, I think
that's interesting.
We're all suffering financially, but I don't know if we're collectively willing to make the sacrifices to get to where we need to go. Because, stop buying stuff online and go to our local traders.
Or cook your own dinner using fresh ingredients. So the age of instant gratification is a very fertile territory for the lying demagogue, for the populist who promises simple solutions to complicated problems.
Yeah. Look, I work in the market research industry and, I think everything that they say will have been tested in focus groups, through surveys, through polls, and it's all about getting the maximum impact. What is going to boost brand Farage, as you say?
Yeah.
What is it that's going to hit with those people that are disgruntled, dissatisfied, frustrated at the situation that they have been a part of building? I mean, and I hold myself, to that. If I want to buy a new kettle, I'll have it delivered to me tonight if I want it. But at the same time, we're all wrestling with this. Whatever this issue is, I don't think we know quite how to hold people accountable. We can't even hold people accountable for stealing steaks in Aldi. Let alone politicians.
No, that's true. It's a slightly different scenario. I think there was a suspension of reality during the Brexit referendum from which we are yet to recover. I know it's all roads lead back to Andrea Leadsom and Pascal Lamy, that interview that I did on Newsnight when the BBC, which was pretty much the last chance of objectivity or decent reporting on this, because so much of commercial broadcast media is influenced by Rupert Murdoch-style tabloid journalism. But when they told me, we've got Pascal Lamy on from the World Trade Organization, but we need to get someone else on from the other side to balance it out. So they booked Andrea Leadsom. Something died in me that day. And it was probably what you're describing. It was a somewhat a presumed accountability, just a presumption that some things were baked in stone, actually, that they were just permanent and forever, but they weren't. And I don't think we've ever got back, actually, in the next 10 years. And he's the big beneficiary. He's the biggest beneficiary of that.
Yeah. And truth, I think, just isn't a currency anymore. I think we've abandoned objective truth. I think we're all willing to lie about ourselves, about the things that we see here.
Gosh, this is a very bleak worldview, but you're talking about people's Instagram offering up a version of their own existence that isn't true.
Yeah, look, I'm not saying that everybody does it, but it's easy to fall into it. And we do all, it's easier to walk past something than it is to ask the question, why is that thing happening? And it takes in this, attention-grabbing world, I think it takes sacrifice to stop and ask the question, I think.
And the big thing, of course, being a desperation for change, whatever it may be. And that takes us back to 2015 as well. I want change and I want it now, which fits entirely with Paul's analysis. And someone who comes along and says, I'll give you change and I'll give it now. OK, I'll vote for you, even though you're a Vladimir Putin fanboy and you thought Liz Truss was an economic genius and you told us that Brexit was going to make us all rich and it would get rid of red tape and our fishing fleets would be riding high on the seven seas. Even though every single promise you've ever made anyone, you've broken. I don't mind because you keep promising me more. Another promise. It's another promise. It cancels out all the previous promises. I promise. Important interview for you next. As the first children to arrive in this country, the first children in dire need of medical treatment to arrive in this country from Gaza have arrived this week, and we'll speak to some of the people responsible for A, them getting here, and B, them receiving treatment. And I think I'll pose the question before they even come into the studio of how on earth we've ended up being a country where only 2 have come, and only now since that bombardment of Gaza began. It is 11:47.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:49 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I took a call the other day from a contact who was telling me that they were expecting 2 children to arrive at Heathrow Airport imminently, who were coming here to receive a relatively urgent medical treatment. I mean, I guess the children still in Gaza in need of rather more urgent medical treatment wouldn't even be able to make the journey in the first place. But they said something to me that I couldn't believe. I did a double take. I made them repeat themselves. 2 things. The first thing they said was that these are the first children to come here from Gaza for medical treatment. And the second thing they said was that it had taken 17 months to secure the visas. So the battles had been fought essentially with the current and the previous government, and I subsequently discovered that none of this would have happened had it not been for the work of an organisation called Project Pure Hope, which is a coalition of health leaders in the UK and humanitarians committed to working towards providing life-saving medical care and support to children who are victims of this conflict, regardless of their nationality, religion or ethnicity. And 2 of the founders of Project Pure Hope, Dr. Farzana Rahman and Omar Din, are with me now. Farzana, I should start by asking you to fact-check me. Was that all true? The 17 months, the fact that these 2 girls are the first children to come here from Gaza, and the fact that you've had to be lobbying tirelessly to make this happen?
Yeah, it's true. And probably the thing to kind of add in here is this is all privately funded. So there is no cost to the taxpayer. But as you say, James, it has been a really long road with a lot of challenges.
Why? I mean, I know that that's a slightly leading question, but in a nutshell, why has it been so hard?
I think indecision and fear. And at the end of it, what we had were children who were dying. So in the 17 months, we're so happy that we brought these 2 kids. But this all started with a little boy who was 3 years old, who we wanted to help, who had some of the most severe burns any of us have ever seen, who was in a healthcare system without anaesthetic, and who we tried to save. And that little boy died on Christmas Day. And so many children have died. And this is privately funded care for children, and it has been an uphill battle.
Omar, when you set up the organisation, when you set up Project Pure Hope, did you have much inkling of how high some of these obstacles would be? I mean, given, as Farzana has stressed, given that it is you're raising your own money, you're fundraising to make this happen. Why would there be a problem getting children to come here on the charities ticket to receive treatment that they urgently need?
We thought it'd be quite straightforward, is the answer. I mean, we've worked in healthcare for a long time, and some of us have been involved in delivering care very proudly to refugees from different crises, including Ukraine, Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria. And so whilst those were NHS schemes, and we recognised that this wouldn't be one of them, we didn't think this was very different to what we would be doing because we're experienced in doing that work. So, yeah, we did think it'd be straightforward. And the fact that it's taken this long, obviously we've learnt a lot along the way, and we've managed to engage with lots of different people, but it really shouldn't take this long.
The broader initiative, the overall initiative, has seen, I think, 200 children relocated for medical treatment. Why did these 2 come here? What was it about what we can provide, or what was the fit?
Yeah, and those kind of 200 have been distributed across a number of different countries who have, in the large part, paid for that through kind of government funds. This is obviously privately funded, and so we kind of in the first instance, for the children to leave Gaza. That's vetted by COGAT, which is the Israeli organisation in charge of security and aid in the region. The WHO, who have kind of raised the crisis that children are facing. And then once they were in Egypt, they were then assessed by an on-the-ground team and then by specialist clinicians in the UK to make sure that we were bringing children who could really benefit from specialist care.
So can you tell us a little about them? Should we start with Gina, who's 5, I think?
Yeah, she's 5. She's got an eye condition that, if is not treated, will lead to her losing her sight. She suffers from post-traumatic stress. If you can imagine what the last 18 months have been like, her and her family have been victims of bombardment. And so she's a really scared little girl, like all of our children. And I think that's what we see. And then Rama is 12. She has a kind of chronic bowel issue, which is very significant. But she was terrified when they were running from the bombs that because she couldn't run, her family would die. And she's 12 years old. So these kids, they've got the injuries that we are treating. But I think for me, one of the things that really hit me when I met them was just the depth of the psychological trauma that these children have. And I don't know how you can even begin to heal, but we're hoping that in this safe space, it will be a place of healing and love and safety before they then, go back to somewhere safe.
And Omar, they'll get psychological support as well while they're here.
Yeah, so our support is holistic in that they're going to get treatment for their specific injuries and illnesses, but we're wrapping that around with everything from social care through to psychological therapy. And again, all of that will be privately funded through the funds that we raise.
Can I ask you a question? Do you keep stressing that because you're worried about how some people might respond to a perception that it's being paid for by the NHS?
100%. I mean, we've seen...
that's grim, isn't it?
Yeah, we've seen over the past sort of 24 hours where this great news has been shared.
Yes.
What some of the reaction to that has been. And we understand it, but it's clearly the case that, we've gone over and above to make sure that nothing that we are doing has any impact either to the NHS system. So these are not NHS hospitals in which the children will be treated, but in private wings, and that we have private funds.
And yet those of us who would be happy to see our tax pounds spent on looking after just a tiny fraction of the children whose lives have been upended by the events in Gaza, no one takes any notice of us anymore. It sometimes feels, doesn't it? But I was worried that would be your answer to the question, because you've both hit that button 3 or 4 times since you came into the studio. Absolutely no British taxpayers' money has been spent upon this project, which leads me to the next question, which is, do we have any idea how many children there are in Gaza in need and not receiving it? Because we see footage constantly of bombed out hospitals. We know that healthcare, we know aid has been cut off. Well, I do. I'm not sure how many people following coverage in the British media. They're more concerned about an Irish rap group at the moment, but the aid has been cut off for 2 months now. Do we have any idea how many children are in dire straits?
It's thousands and thousands. We have the highest number of child amputees in the world concentrated in Gaza. And to give some context, that children who have suffered amputation, traumatic amputation, often require years to heal. And we're talking about thousands, and that's just one small set. So we are talking about thousands. And we're not talking about bringing thousands to the UK. We're talking about bringing a really small number, because you hear thousands and perhaps it's difficult to imagine that one child, but these are our children. They are like the children in the lives of all of the listeners here. And I think about what it's like when my son is ill and he's got a cold, or he's a bit more ill and I need to take him to A&E. I think about how my world stops, but I know I've got somewhere to go. And then I think about the parents of these children who, your child is sick, the sickest that they can be, and there is nowhere for them to go.
And it makes it more powerful, perhaps, that when Gina's mother gave an interview to another broadcaster, one of the first things she said was that she hoped other children would get the chance to benefit from the chance to receive medical care overseas. I used to have a problem, Omar, with the word holistic. I used to think it was a bit Californian, but I was an idiot, and I'm not anymore. Well, at least not on that front. I'm still an idiot in lots of other ways, because I know what it means, and it's crucial, and it's desperately important. But it rather in the context of what Farzana has just said, some of these mental scars, let alone the physical ones, of the children that are still there, will never heal.
Yeah.
It's a permanent trauma.
That's right. But there's still hope, right? And every child deserves hope. That's our strapline. And it's important because we embody that through doing everything we can to give the most excellent service and healthcare provision that we can to our patients. One of the principles that we have at Project Pure Hope is excellence. And that's, we're not just simply bringing over 2 patients, we're going to do some treatment and then send them home. We want every single aspect of their care delivery, their experience of being here, and when they get back as well, to be excellent. So, look, we're not going to do absolutely everything, but we're going to do everything we can in the most excellent way possible.
I'm a big fan of excellence. Farzana, how can people, and a lot of people, just because I imagine you're quite bruised by some of the reactions that you've described, an awful lot of people want to know how they can help, how they can get involved in supporting the work that Project Pure Hope does. I
think 2 ways. So we already have the next few cases that we could help lined up, ready to go, and we need funding to add extra funding to that. But also, just please ask your representatives in government to support this. As we said, there is no burden to the British taxpayer, but delays cost lives.
Alan asked the question you may not want to answer. He just wonders whether, on air or off air, would you be able to name people who had actually worked hard to block this from happening? I don't want you to get into any trouble, but just tell Alan quietly, are there people who you could actually make a list of?
It's probably a conversation for a private conversation for another day, but we are really
But his instincts are correct. Some people have worked harder than others to stop.
We are just keen to get these children.
I think if it's okay with you,
yes,
we'd just like to thank the people who have supported us.
Absolutely.
So absolutely huge thanks to everybody who's donated so far. We've had private charitable donations in excess of £500,000.
Wow.
The remaining over £500,000 has come from a number of charities, including Virgin Unite, Islamic Relief, Reed Foundation. So we want to say a huge thank you to everybody who's participated. And if people want to donate now, please go to purehope.co.uk. All of our details are on there. You can see the work that we've done to date, even before these 2 children arrived, and we'll keep updating you on that.
purehope.co.uk, and an opportunity there to give whatever you can, actually, to this incredible cause, which, as I said, I couldn't quite believe. Just on last Friday when I took a call, I couldn't believe they were the first children to come here, and it had taken 17 months just to get the visas.
We hope not the last, right?
We certainly do, and hopefully people listening to this will be able to play a small part in making sure of that, making that come true. Back you go to purehope.co.uk. Farzana, thank you. I should have added you're a consultant radiologist, which is why you sound like you know what you're talking about. Dr. Farzana Rahman and Omar Din, a healthcare executive and both co-founders of Project Pure Hope. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Go on, once more then. purehope.co.uk. Just do it, all right? It's 12:02.
James O'Brien on LBC.
6 minutes after 12 is the time. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I've been overruled. This is outrageous. My freedom of speech is under attack. The producer has kiboshed the topic that I wanted to talk about this hour. On the perfectly reasonable grounds that it would be incredibly boring. That was actually my conclusion and hers. But I'm quite keen sometimes to go a bit meta when I'm on the radio, especially on Fridays when it looks like being a lovely weekend. And it's a long weekend, of course, coming up for many of us. Bad luck if you're not in that number. Are you doing a shift on Monday, Keith? You got a nice day off? Are you working on Monday? No? Everybody's happy. Who's in for me? Do we know? Should probably find out before I come on air. 7 minutes after 12 is the time. It's not her, don't worry. You're going to be denied that treat. Paul Brand, the brilliant ITV correspondent, will be here on Monday. And I sometimes, when I'm feeling a bit frisky, not like that, matron, when I'm feeling a bit frisky, I quite like to sort of defy all of the expectations and tropes of phone-in radio, but it hardly ever works. See, I think it worked with buses, but no one else did. So we did a phone-in on buses, which I thought was fascinating. We met a bloke who knew about the weirdest bus in the world. A bus that goes on the third Tuesday of every month. What, could you remember the details? The third Tuesday of every month or something like that. And that's how much he knew about buses. And I felt that simply by getting him onto the radio, it had justified the entire topic. I don't do motoring topics, but I think once, ironically, we did do a phone-in about a really unfair parking ticket that you've once received. So I like to go meta, and I like to do irony, which means every now and then, if I'm in the right mood, if I'm in a mischievous mood, I want to do a topic precisely because I know it's going to be so boring. But we came close to doing it by accident earlier this week when we were talking about net zero. And I can tell this. Are you interested in this stuff? This is a bit like the Toto the dog pulling back the curtain in The Wizard of Oz. Sometimes you must have been doing it for a long time before this starts happening. I haven't asked any of my colleagues whether they have the same thing. But a caller says something, and I know it's going to skew the rest of the phone in. And all I mean by that is that they say something perfectly innocuous and pertinent and interesting in that moment, but it's going to change the nature of the phone in. However long, and goodness knows sometimes they are very long, however long the introduction, however hard I've worked to get the question in front of you that I want you to answer, a caller can sometimes say something that means the phone-in will change in that moment into something completely different. And it almost happened earlier this week when we were talking about net zero and someone mentioned heat pumps. And I actually said in the break to the producer, do not let this turn into a phone-in about heat pumps. I do not want a succession of callers saying, well, I've got a heat pump and it's great. Or I've got a heat pump and it's all... I don't know why I've done that voice. That's rude. I'm sorry. And people ringing in and saying, I've got a heat pump and it's wonderful. Or I've got a heat pump and it's awful. Or I've got a heat pump and it's mediocre. Or I've got a heat pump and I don't really have an opinion about it, to be honest. I don't want the phone-in to turn into a phone-in about heat pumps. It's about net zero and our psychological relationship with environmental policy. And it very nearly turned into a phone-in about heat pumps. So today I wanted to have a phone-in about solar panels. I like the way I said that. Solar panels. Today I wanted to have a phone-in about solar panels because I just want to know more about them and whether I should have them and whether they're any good. What are they like? I thought we could shed some light on the subject. But I'm not going to. Don't write "do it" then on the screen when I've spent 10 minutes admitting that it would be really boring. It would be really boring, right? Should we see? The backup is weight loss jabs, okay? Which is a question about whether they're about to be given out in pharmacies, and I still haven't completely shaken the idea. Thank you for that. Lee's been in touch to tell us I haven't got a heat pump, James. Thank you, Lee. Have a great weekend. Should we try it or not? Does it work? So if we're proved right, well, also, who's going to ring in now that I've said it's really boring? You go, hello, James, I'm really boring. What do you want to know about my solar panels? Is it possibly interesting? Should we? Yeah, come on then. Should we do it? It's really important, this. And that is what I said to you some time ago. We have to find ways to do the environment phone-ins that fit with our way of doing everything, which is interesting and slightly at odds with what most of the rest of the media is doing. So, solar panels, what a waste of time and money. Ed Miliband, I'm going to write a song about how awful he is. Oh, Richard Littlejohn's done that in the Daily Mail today. So, solar panel, it should be obvious, shouldn't it, that sustainable energy is the future. Whether it's wind or wave or sun, the stuff that is always there needs to be better harnessed. If we'd tried to do this, if we tried harder and longer to do this, I'm sure we'd have made more progress than we've currently. It's not going to work, is it? Is it going to work as a phone? Now I'm having all sorts of crises of confidence. I'm undermining my own phone-in even as I decide to. Don't send me the word no with 8 O's after it, V. I'm trying to rum up some confidence here. I'm trying to get some enthusiasm about it. Jack says, I like this as well. I'll tell you one thing about solar panels before I switch off. Everyone's a critic. He says, don't get them on a lease or on finance. You won't be able to sell your house if you did. Yeah. Can you get solar powered heat pumps? Asked Mike. I don't know is the short answer to that. I'm just going to read out 2 more texts. Carol says, no, don't do it. You can make most things interesting, but this will have me switching off. And Yes, please, James. Solar and heat pumps are all really confusing. I don't do that kind of radio, Iona. That's at weekends. I don't do. Ring me with your questions about solar panels. I had solar panels, but someone stole them, says John. It was daylight robbery. Well played. And the only downside to solar panels is the insufferable bores that the owners turn into. That's why I'm not going to do it. If you really want to talk to me about solar panels, I will make room for you this hour. But that is not the main topic. Even by my standards, getting around to the main topic at 13 and a half minutes after the hour is a new low. But there is room for you on the programme if you want to talk to me about solar panels. Okay? But I want to talk to you about weight loss jabs. So the plan today, where it is being suggested that they are given out for free at high street pharmacies. And I think this might be a brilliant idea. I really do. I think that if it is as good as everybody says it is, if these things are as miraculous, well, they're not miracle cures, because if we've learned anything when we've talked about them in the past, we've learned that you have to do it in conjunction with other things. And that's where my question's going to come from in a moment. But the 11.4 billion pounds that it is that type 2 diabetes and other conditions cost the health service every year, obesity-related conditions, they reckon that it could save the NHS billions and billions of pounds if we just got people smaller. About 50,000 patients so far have been able to access the jabs on the NHS. How many Britons do you think are currently classed as obese and would therefore be eligible? Go on, have a guess. How many would you say? 15 million people in this country are classified as obese, and I know there's some wiggle room with body mass index and the rest of it. There's not much wiggle room if you're... No, stop that, James. 15 million people are classified as obese, and only 50,000 are currently able to access the jabs. So, I mean, you can buy them privately, Boots, Superdrug, knock them out for about 150 quid a month. So some people listening will have done that. I want you to tell me whether and why you welcome this idea. I also would like, for people who haven't heard this discussion in the past, I'd like you to tell me why they're not miracle cures, why they are simply part of a weight loss program. But if we're going to start giving them out for free, are we ducking the question of personal responsibility? I know how unhelpful and reductivist it is to say to an obese person, eat less and exercise more. It is never that simple. Also, as someone who played tennis yesterday on the hottest 1st of May in history, exercising is not as easy as it sounds for some of us. So I know that eat less, exercise more is unhelpful. But does a drug that essentially loses weight for you, takes away the need for willpower, do you welcome that? Or does it worry you that we lose something quite human in the process? I don't think that's a stupid question. I hope it's properly phrased. But I want you to tell me why you would welcome or not welcome free. And of course, wasn't that sad what Omar and Farzana said about... Did you notice that when they kept saying it hasn't cost anything, it's all privately funded, it's all privately funded? And you realise that when the little girls arrived at Heathrow yesterday and the cameras were there to greet them, you know that the internet would have been awash with people, 2 sick children, 2 poorly children, a poorly 5-year-old and a poorly 12-year-old, and the invitation that some people will have seen in that story to just spout their hatred. Incredible. But this also would end up being a net benefit to the British taxpayer. It would end up saving fortunes for the NHS. So what do we think? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. I want to know 2 things, really. First thing, is this making it all too easy? All right, that's the key question that I've got. I think I'm still a little bit. I'm a little bit overweight. Perpetually, my weight's really weird. Actually, it goes up and down for reasons that I can't always follow. But I mean, are we going to reach a point where essentially everybody is close to their optimum weight? These drugs become so popular, they become so widespread that we actually abolish obesity. And why on earth would that be a bad thing? There's quite a few questions here. Well, I'll tell you what I should do. You know what I should do, don't you? I should shut up and let you answer some of them. All right, then I will. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. Weight loss jabs may be given free at high street pharmacies. As someone who has a relationship with obesity, with weight loss jabs, or with both, what do you think of that? It's 12:18.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 12:19. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. So Victoria makes a point that I think I should have made a moment ago. As a therapist in private practice, I see many people with weight and food issues. Maybe instead of free jabs, the government should put money into helping people figure out the cause behind the way they view food. Emotional eating, self-sabotage, etc. That's a really good point. That's what I meant. When I said, are we making it all too easy? That sounded a bit glib. Are we ducking? I mean, if someone tells you they've got a simple solution to a complicated problem, they're probably Nigel Farage, and they're almost certainly lying. So, or they're deeply mistaken. So, does anyone else share my vague misgivings about this proposal? We'll talk to Zach in Portsmouth first in just 1 second. But before that, a special request from Scott, the T-shirt king of Uxbridge. He writes, "Hi, James." I nearly made that up. He's a big fan of the show, but he didn't write that, actually. "Hi, James. Please could you give a shout-out to Uxbridge Football Club, who are in the playoff final of the Isthmian League South Central Division on Sunday." And then he adds in capital letters, "Come on, the Reds." Yes, Scott, I'd be delighted to give a shout-out to Uxbridge Football Club and wish them the very, very best of luck in the playoff final of the Isthmian League South Central Division on Sunday. And while I'm at it, I'd also like to wish the very best of luck to Kidderminster Harriers, who are in the playoff semi-finals of the National League North on Sunday against Chester. And I wish Chester good luck as well. In fact, all football teams in playoffs this weekend, the very best of luck. But I hope Kidderminster win. 21 after 12 is the time. Zach is in Portsmouth. Zach, what would you like to say?
First of all, right with you with the Harriers, mate. I'm from that part of the world myself. So
are you serious? It's a small world, isn't it, Zach? Come on, the Reds.
Hagley.
Oh, fantastic. Go on, yes.
First-time caller, by the way. Long-time listener.
Welcome.
So, yeah, this weight loss jab. I've been overweight most of my life, and so struggled. And when I heard about Ozempic, first of all, I went to my GP. She then recommended Manjaro. She said there's less side effects with this particular one.
Okay.
Went on that for 3 months just before Christmas. But as I was telling your producer, it was one of the worst things I ever did from experience with losing weight. It was horrendous what the side effects were that I suffered with. And I heard nothing but all the good news. I went privately, paid for it. Again, I regret doing that because it was not worth the money I found.
I mean, that's different, isn't it? Because most people, I mean, there'll be plenty of people waiting to talk to me who have had much happier experiences with it. And every drug, every medicine has potential side effects. Even aspirin comes with about 40 pages of paperwork when you open the box. It's just that none of us read it. But you, that's not grounds not to like it. What about the psychological? What about this notion I have, and Victoria picked up on it, the therapist, that it doesn't actually fix the reasons why people have bad relationships with food?
No, and that's absolutely right, because of course the whole thing about these things is to make it actually work, and the ones that have you're either very lucky and it works instantly and you do lose the weight and stones come off. But the problem is, James, you've got to use it permanently. The minute you stop it, and they say that the maximum time, the period that you can use it for is something like, I was told up to 3 years maximum. You wouldn't want to have it for life. And so the minute you stop it, so then if you don't fix that psychological element, because I went into it thinking, okay, well, I'll use it as a quick fix, lose the weight, and then I'll mentally then be suddenly I'll be, zapped with willpower to lose weight, to go and exercise. And of course that won't happen. I knew that. So I had to get the willpower first.
And you need that. Oddly, that word holistic pops up again. It's not enough in and of itself. It's not enough on its own to fix these. And are you in a better place now? Have you got things under?
Yeah.
Oh wow!
Since Christmas, I've reversed my diabetes just by doing all the usual, very boring but very stereotypical things: walking, eating less, quitting the fizzy drinks. That's all I did, and I've lost so much more weight from anything that the jabs could have done for me. And I feel so much better. And every GP that I've gone to has always said, oh, when I was having stomach issues, he said, well, what's caused that? And I said, well, I've been taking Manjaro. And every one of them rolled their eyes and they said, oh, God, I wish people would stop going on these drugs.
Well, we're going to get a positive story next, and not just for balance, but also because it will be, as we've established together, Zach. There will be some bad experiences, but I mean that is taken into account by NICE, isn't it? The National Institute of Clinical Excellence, and it means that the positives objectively massively outweigh the negatives, but that makes no difference to your experience, of course. And I'm glad that you've got it all under control using, shall we say, more traditional measures. Rachel is in Coventry. Rachel, what would you like to say?
Yeah, hi James.
Hello,
I'm also a first-time caller.
Welcome. Also from the Midlands. It's like a big old get-together today. Carry on, Rachel.
Good old Midlands speaker. Yeah, so yes, I suppose I am the positive so far story in that I started taking Manjaro 8 weeks ago. I've lost just over 1.5 stone at the moment, but as you've alluded to, that has been me undertaking massive changes as well. I've rejoined a gym. I think, and I said this to your producer, the fact that I am paying for it and I am not a rich person has actually given me quite a motivation to think, I'm paying for this is going to work. So the thought of getting it for free is quite an interesting one for me personally, who has the privilege of being able to afford it just. However, I think what I've said to a few people about the bashing that it does get a lot is I stopped smoking 20 years ago and I did just do that cold turkey.
Yeah.
But I've never heard somebody say or berate a person for stopping smoking by using patches, e-cigarettes, vapes, etc. We just celebrate in the fact that actually the smoking and the harm it's doing to you, has stopped. And then you have to work on your psychological, I go to the pub, I'm used to smoking, and all those sorts of links, which I just see as being a really similar thing to what I'm doing at the moment.
No, it's patterns of behaviour. They're very hard to break, but you need to work to break them. In fact, No Hostages picks up on your point when they write there are almost, in brackets, almost no societal problems that are solved by invoking the idea of personal responsibility. If a drug helps people avoid health problems and has no significant side effects, why wouldn't you give that medical support to them? Which is kind of what you're saying with the tobacco analogy. But you throw another sort of thing into the mix, don't you, with the question of it being free. So we're letting the perfect be the enemy of the good. If it's free, we're worrying, you and me, Rachel, that some people may not put in the hard yards that you need to do in conjunction with the drug.
And I do see that on forums and things that I've sort of lurked on, that sometimes people are saying, I'm on X dose, I'm not losing, I'm on X, or are you calorie tracking, are you doing this? No. I'm eating when I'm hungry. They're just expecting it to do everything
for them.
And if you're just going to use it that I'm eating when I'm hungry, well, guess what? You're probably not going to be very hungry. And then when you do become hungry again, if that's your trigger, then you're not going to have resolved anything. But as I say, I'm very aware I'm saying that with the affordability that I can do it as a push, and if other people can't and can have access to it, but I do think
I love your point. It's psychological. No, it is. Yeah. It's there as psychological. And of course, when I said we're letting the perfect be the enemy of the good, I mean, just because some people are, as you describe, the massive majority of people on those forums, I presume, are doing everything right and getting the results that they want.
Yeah, it's a mixed bag.
Of course it is. Everything is. And this would be a step, if it saves, 11.4 billion a year, that's incredible. If it saves 5 billion a year, that's incredible too. It's gradations. Good luck with it, Rachel. I love that angle. I hadn't thought of it that way round. But the other thing you've done is make me feel a bit... Well, you've done two things, actually, Rachel. Do you want to know what they are?
Go on.
The first thing you've done is actually give me a word from my crossword this morning that had got me baffled, and that word was lurk.
Okay.
Because I wrote loom. I forget what the definition was. It's something to do with being there but not taking part. And I wrote loom, and it didn't fit with any of the other words around it. So it was there for ages until I rubbed it out. But I couldn't for the life of me work out what the correct answer was. And it's lurk. I can see the blooming crossword in front of me now. And the other thing you've done is make me feel a bit ridiculous for the question about whether it's too easy or not. Because you're right. Could you imagine if someone said to you, I've given up smoking. I used the patches, or I used Alan Carr, or I used the vapes, and you go, that doesn't count. You're cheating. You've cheated.
Yeah.
I've given up. I mean, smoke it. Don't care. You've cheated. Start again and give it up properly.
Yeah, I think that's just the perfect analogy that I'm surprised no one else has said before me.
They have now, Rachel. I should be passing it off as my own next time we have this phone in, but I think it's probably a bit too soon to try to get away with it today. You take care. It's 12:30. Amelia Cox has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 12:32. My friend Dorian Linsky has provided my favourite nugget of political analysis today, and I'm going to share it with you. He's written on Blue Sky. I've just noticed I've been verified on Blue Sky. How exciting is that? As far as I can tell, it's just me and the New York Times at the moment that are verified. Oh, and then blooming news agents. Always the news agents, isn't it? Flipping news agents. Always getting in on my flipping blooming news agents. Anyway, this is what Dorian wrote. Labour's, I'm surprised Emily Maitlis hasn't got a gold tick. Just a blue one like the rest of us plebs. I'm surprised she hasn't been given a special gold one. This is lovely from Dorian. Labour's base-punching strategy reminds me of the Seinfeld episode where George is so obsessed with making Jerry's girlfriend like him, she clearly hates him, that he neglects his own girlfriend, who does like him, and she leaves him. That's a pretty neat summation of some of the calls that we took in the first hour of the programme today. And speaking of politics, and indeed Keir Starmer, Aggie Chambre is here. Back, I can say on air, I think.
Yes.
From honeymoon.
From honeymoon.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Did you have a wonderful time?
I had a brilliant time.
You look incredibly relaxed. We shall soon fix that.
Yeah, just 10 minutes on air with you. And
It used to take me, I'd come back from a lovely holiday sometimes when I was on the Daily Express, and I'd walk over Tower Bridge Blackfriars Bridge, thinking to myself, right, there's going to be some changes around here. I'm going to hang on to this sense of zen and this sense of calmness, and then by lunchtime when I'm walking back over Blackfriars Bridge, all my old habits have returned. But I hope it sticks for longer with you, Aggie. Keir Starmer being given a speech.
Keir Starmer, indeed, he's responded to the election results overnight. And he was asked, first of all, by our colleague Shivani, whether about comments made by one of his winning mayors overnight. This is the Labour mayor for Doncaster, Ros Jones. Now, she strongly criticised his leadership, pointing to decisions on PIP, on national insurance, on winter fuel allowance for a collapse in her majority. She said she wants Starmer to take action. Shivani asked Keir Starmer about that and said, well, what are you going to change?
Well, we promised change at the last election, and we're getting on and delivering that change. So waiting lists are coming down, did 3 million extra appointments on the NHS. Wages are up faster than prices, hugely important in terms of pressures of the cost of living. And interest rates are down now 3 times, which if you've got a mortgage makes a material difference. But look, I could stand here and say, governments tend to do badly in these sorts of elections at this part of the cycle, or that run corners very close. And I'm not going to do that. I'm going to say, in relation to those that didn't vote Labour in these elections, I get it. We need to deliver that change faster. We need to go further. I've been saying for some time that we need to turbocharge what we're doing. What I take out of these is a sort of reinforcing of that message that we need to deliver the change that people want. We need to go further and faster, and I'm determined to do so.
Now, he was also asked about Runcorn. Of course, there were 6 votes in it, but it was won by Reform from Labour. And Keir Starmer was asked whether he regretted not visiting Runcorn and whether Nigel Farage was right that this by-election was won because of migration.
Runcorn was very, very close. I think one of the closest by-elections in history. And there is there's a history of sitting governments not doing particularly well in by-elections like that. I think what's important for me in relation to Runcorn and the other election results is to say to those that didn't vote Labour, I get it. We need to deliver that change. People want to see change. They want the health service working better. We're beginning to deliver that. We've got to go further and faster. They want more money in their pockets. They want to feel better off. We've got to deliver that. They want to feel safe in their own communities. And again, we're putting 13,000 more police into our communities. And they want our borders to be secure. What I would just say to Reform is we've put forward legislation to give many more powers to law enforcement to deal with small boat crossings, the gangs that are running that. Reform came into Parliament and voted against that bill. You can't say on the one hand you're serious about dealing with the problem, and it is a serious problem. On the other hand, vote down powers to give law enforcement the tools that they need to tackle it.
Now, what is interesting is basically everybody seems to agree today, and I should say there are lots of results still to come, but everybody from every party seems to agree that what people want is change. But what that actually looks like is the more difficult thing. I've spoken to a number of Labour MPs this morning. A few of them have said, and some even publicly, we've heard from Kim Johnson, for example, saying Runcorn is a warning we can't ignore. Voters want change, and if we don't offer it with bold, hopeful policies that rebuild trust, the far right will. She's not the only Labour MP who has said comments like that on social media this morning. But then you also have Labour MPs basically saying, look, we can't just immediately press the panic button because we've lost a by-election, and other people saying, look, we've got to stay calm. Some colleagues calling for us to reverse every unpopular decision we've made so far and calling for mass reshuffles, but that is not the answer. But I think there are questions about whether this will refocus, whether this will change the way Keir Starmer wants to run the country, whether this will change the way he wants to approach migration, for example. But I think there are big concerns about this. But also some Labour sources basically saying to me they think this will put more pressure on reform. Scrutiny on their policies will now ramp up. This is, of course, their sixth
Do they have
MP.
any policies? I mean, beyond will be horrible to immigrants.
They do have some policies. They did, of course, put together a manifesto for the last general election. They called it a contract. But it's interesting to see Labour are trying to push them on, for example, the NHS. There was an interview Nigel Farage, the leader of Reform, did on the eve of the local elections, where he was asked about the NHS, and he said, I don't want it funded through general taxation. It doesn't work. It's not working. We're getting worse bang for the buck than any other country, particularly out of our European neighbours. Now, Labour MPs jumped on this and thought this is brilliant for us. The NHS is something that's beloved by the majority of the country. They thought this was great news for them, but then fundamentally they still lost that by-election seat by 6 votes. And I think the reason this is of great concern to lots of people is before lots of Labour MPs thought, OK, well, actually Reform UK worked quite well for us in the last general election. It really squeezed the Conservative vote. But now there is proof that it is squeezing the Labour vote as well. And I think, Runcorn was the 16th safest Labour seat, and that shows to a lot of people that actually Reform are a threat to lots and lots and lots of different Labour MPs, and anything could happen.
That's crucial because they'll be worried. I mean, we forget sometimes. I know you don't. You're a political correspondent, but us lesser mortals sometimes forget that it's self-interest a lot of the time. These people are worried about losing their own seats, which is why they sort of start agitating. But when I say, has he got any policies? Has he put anything forward on what he would do instead of funding the NHS from general taxation?
It's a good question. Not really. I think at the moment it's not exactly clear what they
Not really, or not at all?
Do.
Not even close? Not a flipping sausage?
It's not completely clear yet what Reform UK would do, but I think you're completely right on what Labour MPs are concerned about, basically losing their seats. And if you speak to any one of them, they know exactly how marginal their seat is compared to their colleagues. And I think that's why a lot of them, with those more marginal seats, are banging the drum on changing course.
I don't want to read too much into tone because I wasn't there, but he sounded surprisingly upbeat. Do you think that Labour had contemplated losing more mayoralties in particular? The council stuff isn't going to affect them much. These are largely going to be Tory casualties. But certainly the talk was that they were going to get their head kicked in, and they very nearly squeaked Runcorn. They've lost one. They didn't lose the mayoralty that What's the Chops Jenkins has got because it wasn't theirs to start with, and they've hung on to all the ones so far that they've fought. So could it be, will Keir Starmer possibly be relieved at the moment, a little?
I suspect they're not relieved about Runcorn. I mean, I think they
I thought they'd given up on Runcorn.
No, I think they were still hopeful about Runcorn, although they did say, they've been saying today, we knew that it was on a knife edge. We didn't even call it privately. Well, I think they'd be very pleased they didn't call it privately. But I think they will be very disappointed because fundamentally, and it's difficult to, live in this universe, but if Labour had won that by-election seat, the conversation we would be having today would be completely about the Conservatives and Reform and whether or not Reform were now the official opposition, which is going to happen, I think, more towards the later part of the day because, as you say, the Tories will be the losers, I think, as we go on with the day.
Would Bader not be in trouble? I mean, if things are really bad, it would hurt because for the same reason, Conservative MPs thinking, we've just had one catastrophe when going to the country. We're the relatively small number of MPs that actually managed to hang on to our seats or get elected for the first time. that ain't going to happen under the current leader. Could they be looking for a new leader before long?
I think she is in trouble. That is, without a doubt. Whether or not she is replaced, I don't know yet. I suspect they will give her a little more time. And especially, as I said, because the story this morning has been about the Labour government and there's been more pressure on them. But I think that's difficult for them in another way, because it sort of seemed like they're a bit irrelevant this morning. And it's unbelievable in a way to think that less than a year ago, they were the government, and now, we're barely talking about them. And I think that's a problem in a way, although it helps them to an extent that they can think about their policies and they can get ready for the next set of elections. But I think it's difficult, and we know for sure the Conservatives are a very brutal party.
You're like this, and very wisely, you've put in huge capital letters at the top of this message. Please don't use my name, so I won't. I'm a Labour member and former councillor. I'm sat here today seeing hard-working councillors utterly wiped out in Lancashire, and it's all down to National Labour policies. There are now no Labour councillors in the 4 boroughs in East Lancs. Keir says he wants change. Someone give him a bag of pennies and tell him to go give his head a wobble.
Wow.
There it is. And that's your grassroots misgivings, to use possibly something of an understatement. Aggie Chambre, thank you very much indeed. Your first weekend in London as a married woman.
Oh, how exciting.
It isn't it just? It is 12:43. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Joe's in Kingston. Oh, hello. Solar panels, is it?
I've got a sneaky feeling I'm walking into the lion's den here, but hello, James, to apologise for phoning on such a boring subject.
How dare you ring me on such... What did you want to say about the most boring subject? It's not the most boring. It shouldn't be a boring subject, am I right? No. Let's fix it, Joe. Let's fix that together. What's going on in the world of solar panels?
Well, the thing is that it's a no-brainer to get solar panels. The problem is that the monopoly on the so-called companies that are qualified to fit them are just extortionate. They're extorting the people who actually want to do something good and save some money and a bit of the environment.
Who's doing the extorting?
The certified companies.
So they're still too expensive, are they?
They're too expensive for what they are. The actual panels and everything is not expensive. That's my point.
Oh, okay. So did you do your own?
I kind of did my own, yeah.
Are you allowed to do that?
Well,
mate, you can't be faffing
not.
about with electricity.
No, and that's the point. If you're a DIYer, pretty good DIYer.
I fused my patio washer at the weekend. I'm not going to be installing my own solar
I wouldn't
panels.
advise you do it then.
All the lights downstairs. I was running around with a torch strapped to my head trying to find the fuse. Anyway, carry on, Joe.
Okay, definitely don't do it then.
I don't think anyone's allowed to do that, are they? You're not allowed. You can go on. What did you? Is what you did leak? This is already interesting. Did you break the law, Joe?
Well, what the problem is that to pay back to the grid, you need to be certain. You need to be it needs to be signed off by a certified electrician, which is absolutely 100% right.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So if you want to put back into the grid, it needs to be stable, it needs to be correct and everything, which is 100% right.
Right.
But that connection is a half-hour job by a qualified electrician.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Fitting solar panels, if you have a bit of, you want to look after yourself, you hire a scaffold company that will put up a bit of scaffolding.
Yeah.
To fit them onto the roof tiles, and it's not rocket science. And the panel, you can get a solar panel, decent one, for £60. I'm talking decent. So the actual order system is really
And
cheap.
what do you hook that up to?
Batteries.
And
so
then
I bought batteries from China.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That took 2 months, and it was terrifying because it cost me $2,000.
Cool.
Yeah. But I've got, this is horribly technical, I've got 13 kilowatts of battery. If you go to a company where it's all certified, you would spend 13 grand on 9 kilowatts of battery. They're just batteries.
I've got a certified solar panel fitter on the other line, Joe.
Excellent.
You better stay there, mate, because that's fighting talk. Kevin's in King's Lynn. Kevin, solar panels, eh? Who knew?
How you doing?
I'm all right.
Absolutely outrageous at claiming that we're ripping people off.
Yeah, Joe.
Outrageous. Oh, well, listen, we put a 10-year workmanship warranty. When the booms go, when Martin Lewis stops telling people to buy solar because they didn't get in quick enough, we have to still sit here answering the phones with no income coming in to make sure we look after customers. Of course, we've got to put profit on a job. Otherwise, we'll all go bust every 5 minutes. That's why I've been around 18 years in this game.
Are you busy at the moment?
Very. A lot of factories at the moment. A lot of factories. But listen, two very quick points, James. Two very, very quick points. One, there's a company in Germany making solar panels out of 100% recycled solar panels.
Oh, that's clever.
And
hang on a minute, that's a scam.
Yeah, obviously.
They're just getting old solar panels and giving them a bit of a clean up and then selling them on again as recycled solar panels.
Genuinely, they are recycling. From the Dutch and German board. And another little fact that not many people know of: there's no cobalt in modern lithium batteries.
No one said there was.
No, but
what are you ringing in with these weird little bits of information that are not relevant?
There's always someone, isn't there?
Is there? I've never heard that before. Joe, how much did you spend total on your kit and caboodle?
About 5.5.
What would it cost me, Kevin, to get you round mine to fit what Joe's got?
I didn't hear what Joe had apart from the battery. What did he have on the solar?
14 kilowatts, mate.
I've got a 13 kilowatt battery.
It was 14 a minute ago.
12 solar panels, each one about 450 watt.
Okay, so round about a 5 kilowatt system, round about 5.5, 6 grand if you want a decent warranty and a decent inverter. Yes, that's about the right price.
13 kilowatt system.
No, that's a 13 kilowatt hour battery. A 13 kilowatt hour battery. There's a massive amount of lithium out there, and it is a great time to buy at the moment. We've now moved. A lot of us have moved over. A lot of people are moving over to solid state batteries, which is lithium that is impossible to catch fire. But that is the next wave of technology breaking out, and that's a little bit more.
So,
expensive.
what would you charge roughly for what Joe's done himself? You'd just put about 10% on that, would you, or 20%? What do you get?
A little bit more, bit more than that. It's about from the market.
But Joe's clever. I mean, I wouldn't know what to do, so I'm happy to pay you to come and do it.
And that's the whole point. Look, it's a massive thing that's going to stay on your house for 30 years. You've got to make sure you get it right. We do 50% of our work as remedial work from where people have gone for the cheapest possible, and they get the mistakes
and then you come
afterwards.
back and do it. And how much money are people likely to? I mean, are any of your clients turning a profit, Kevin?
Well, for my own circumstances, it's the easiest one because I've got real figures. I generate round about £2,000 worth of electricity a year. Yeah. But because I'm also displacing all of the diesel, because we've now got 2 EVs, it probably works out at about a £3,000 a year benefit. And my system costs round about £14,000. It's a very large battery.
So it's paid for itself in 5 years, and then you're into profit, as it were.
A little bit quicker than that, because energy prices go up, don't they? But
they do. I like it. Kingston and Kingsley. Shall we part as friends, gentlemen?
Yeah, definitely. My point is that I don't, rather than putting 5.5 grand into the bank every summer, I don't pay for electricity. I pay 20 quid for the standing charge. So it's a no-brainer. Encourage people to do it and make it easier for people to actually do a little bit themselves and get the technical bit in with the people that are qualified. That's my point.
I'm not going to get my customers up on roofs. We'll leave it at that, shall we?
No, you don't have to. But if they're capable, if they're confident, and they're following the safety stuff, why can't they? It's not rocket science.
No, you're right, but you're right, but it's also a regulated industry, and there's a lot of training goes in behind it. I'm not going to bore you with it now.
That's the catch. It's a regulated industry, so they can charge what they like.
Hang on. I am still here, by the way. Hello, James here. Lads, you want it to be regulated, Joe. It's all very well you being able to do it, but I want the industry to be regulated. It's electricity.
Yeah, but the electricity, definitely. But you look at the amount of clients that are complaining about the fitting.
Well, they're not Kevin's clients. We're just, it's like everything else. There'll be some good operators and some bad operators and probably some smooth operators.
But even the qualified regulator people are having complaints because they're not fitting it properly when it's on the roof.
A lot of them are.
The bit that people can't see.
Yeah, you're right, says Kevin. So find a good one. Get on TripAdvisor or whatever the equivalent is.
No, there's an easy way.
That was quite a good joke. Did you get it, lads? TripAdvisor. Because what happens to your circuit?
It trips out.
Thank you very much.
There is an easy way, James.
A little bit of solar panel humour for you there, T.
Can I just say,
my day.
Can I just leave you with one thing? There is actually a network. It's not an advert for an individual company.
Right.
There is a network called the Solar Nation. They are in every county of the UK. It's individual, family, local installers.
We like
and
that.
They've all come together. So if you're looking for a solar power company in the UK, go to solar-power.co.uk. These guys set the industry up. We've been around 15, 20 years, and we're the ones who pick up the pieces every time there's a boom and a bust.
Right, I'm going to try again. Shall we part as friends, chaps?
Yes.
Right, Joe, Kevin, shake hands, please. Shake hands, please.
A virtual handshake.
There we go. We had a nice fair
Good
fight.
luck for the future, Kevin.
Go on, listen. Oh, lovely. Thank you, Joe. What a nice pair of there you go. Solar panels, eh? Who knew? Absolute radio gold.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 12:54. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. One of a lovely guest on Full Disclosure this week. I should have time to play you that clip and talk to Natasha, who's in Brent, but I'll go to Natasha first so that she can have the last word on these. The idea of giving out these jabs for free, Natasha, the weight loss jabs. What made you pick up the phone? If you can remember, you've been on hold for about a day and a half. Those two fellas.
I get the last word. So
I thought they'd never stop. I thought they'd never stop, Natasha. Those solar panel fellas.
It was so fascinating. It was so worth the time,
go on.
James.
Go on then.
Not. I'm absolute zealot for Manjaro. It is, at the moment, it is changing my life and the lives of lots of people I know. And I bet you know plenty of people on Manjaro, James. You just might not know that you do because there's a stigma around it. Because of this whole, it's cheating, it's the easy route, they just want to get thin. It's just about vanity, not health, So
yes.
A lot of people are really reluctant to sort of out themselves. I haven't told most people I know that I'm on it, which I don't know why I'm choosing to out myself on national radio.
No one's listening.
If anyone,
they all turned off. They all turned off while the solar panel chaps were going at it.
We might have lost them at that point, yeah. But honestly, I'm such a zealot. It is incredible what it does for people's health. So I've been on blood pressure tablets for years, statins. I've had 3 joints replaced.
Wow.
That is all obesity related. I wouldn't have had to have had those joints replaced. I can now come off the blood pressure tablets. I can now come off statins.
You're a poster girl. You're a poster girl for it. What? Briefly, because I've got to play a clip of my Brian Conley interview. What happens when you come off the jabs?
Well, that's the $6 million question, and maybe I'll come back on the show at that point and tell you. But it's not magic. It's not a panacea. The Manjaro doesn't do it for you. It makes it easier for you to change.
That's what we needed to hear. I love it.
To change that relationship with food,
and it's worked for you. It's working for you, and you're doing the other stuff that you need to do as well. But you cannot argue with the evidence of coming off blood pressure tablets, and as you say, if you'd got on there 10 years earlier, you wouldn't have needed the joint replacements. Thank you very much, Natasha. Here's a little clip of Brian Conley, who is this week's guest on Full Disclosure, and is just every bit the joyous company that you would expect. Although we did, of course, also veer into some quite personal and serious territory.
So with the dyslexia, I didn't know. It was never recognised. I was just seen as... I thought I'm thick.
Yeah, that's a terrible thing to hear and to read when I was preparing to talk to you, to believe at a young age that you're actually stupid.
Absolutely.
It's a horrible thing. It's a horrible thing.
And thought I was lazy because I couldn't keep up, and they'd have like little sort of tester exams and things like that and put these papers out and everyone's going like this. And I'm just looking around going, I can't even read it.
Yeah.
What is happening? How comes I can't do this? I really am trying as hard as everyone else, and then in the end I'm sort of 9, 10 and I just I can't do this, I've got to give up, So of course, I used to make everyone laugh, and that was my way of, my defence mechanism, and I got good at it.
And did it make you feel special? What's the chicken and what's the egg? Did you do it because you had to?
It was the only thing I was actually good at.
Right.
It was the only thing I shone at.
Yeah.
But more than anything, it was singing. I always say I was born to sing, and everything else I've learned.
Okay.
Singing is something I don't even think about. It's just there. I can always call upon it and sing. And then the comedy was sort of part of it, but then. But that just developed over time.
People might be surprised to hear that, because they would. There's almost 3 acts, isn't there, to your career?
We've got the acts, but they always go, I can't believe you. Haven't you got a nice voice? I go, well, I've done 8 musicals, but I've done 5 in the West End.
Of course.
I've done Johnson, I've done Me and My Girl, Chitty Chitty
But
Bang Bang,
the chronology is why they'd be surprised, because they thought that came after the big TV. But in fact, The Voice was there before the comedy, before the rest of it. People won't realise that. And there's an awful lot of stuff you won't realise. He's just a lovely man, a really lovely man, and we have quite a moving conversation at one point about the role that therapy played in helping him come to the realisation that those labels, thick and lazy, that were stuck on him when he was a child, had a very lasting influence over his life. I think you'll really enjoy it. A little treat for the long weekend, because I will not be here on Monday. Paul Brand will be standing in for me. I'll be back, all being well, on Tuesday morning. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can also pause and rewind live radio, as well as listen to a range of podcasts, including James O'Brien Daily, the best bits of my show in 60 minutes every day. Download it now for free from your app store, or head to globalplayer.com, where you can also get full disclosure. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick, but now it's Sheila Fogarty.
James O'Brien on LBC.